Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is February 22nd, 2026, and we are here to talk about the world, current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Hello?
Yo.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Well, I'll hear you better when I put my headphones on. I had to do the sunglasses trick.
Oh,
It's part of our new signature opening. It's very high tech. What I do is I put on sunglasses kind of like Agent Smith in the Matrix, and then I remove them, and then I put the headphones on, and we have the conversation.
gotcha.
But it adds to a little bit of that aesthetic, because people were like, what does Agent Smith look like? And I was like, the crazy thing is, everyone has always told him, Agent Smith, you look just like Hugo Weaving. And he's a friend of mine from college, but apparently he's Hugo Weaving's lost brother.
Yeah, I don't look that good,
Just go
but
with
it were
it.
otherwise.
It's fine. Cinema.
Well, how have you been?
I've been well. Been getting really buff from doing this push-ups per death on the road to immortal. There's a lot that I need to learn and a lot that I feel like I need to get good at steering my team in the direction of. Humans are sometimes stubborn where they don't want to do what you suggest just because they're just controversial. They just want to be a contrarian all the time. Maybe they were a very defiant child growing up and they continue to be a defiant adult. Whatever the case may be, there are a lot of games that I feel like are winnable if we steer the ship in the right direction. But then there's a percentage of games, which I guess I would ask Dota players, percentage of games you feel like you lose because your team drafts so poorly. It's like if you were to be drafting a hockey team, right? Because we talk about hockey here, and you drafted all goalies, you have kind of an awkward set of players on the field. Like maybe, yes, they're really good at protecting the goal, but they're not very mobile. Like they can't move around the ice very fast, and they're not very good at taking quick shots against the enemy goalie. So it's not a very good draft. In Dota, there are a lot of games where it feels like that, where your draft is just so imbalanced and ill-equipped to deal with just generalized combat that it feels like you're kind of doomed from the start. Even if you play your characters correctly, you just chose the wrong characters. So I'm trying to basically figure out my drafting method of how do I draft around my allied heroes, and then how do I draft to counter the enemy heroes that I see in the first round based on the heroes that I play. So it's a work in progress, but we've been remaining about steady with MMR, not climbing a whole bunch recently. I think I'm up like 100 MMR since last week, so a little climb. But yeah, still a lot to learn. The game is fun. I enjoy it. Been playing SC2 as well. This has been actually a pretty noisy week in terms of news and stuff that I want to ask you about, just from what I saw. Today there was even a fresh one, or maybe it's yesterday. Mexico in the news, because apparently Mexico killed a or some cartel leaders, and now the cartels are playing back.
They're doing what?
The cartels are playing back, like they're invading, I think I heard Guadalajara, and people were in curfew imposed by the cartels. They said don't go outside after 2 p.m. or something.
Yeah, I heard about the assassination. I hadn't heard anything about retaliation, though.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's news to me.
I thought it was pretty cool
You know,
because we had talked about the Mexican government as being relatively passive in dealing with the cartels, or at least having a soft hand compared to like what the U.S. government has done in the past. But this would be a direction, or a different direction than that. Like they're just directly killing leaders, which is very direct and kind of establishing your monopoly on violence. And we'll see how it pans out, I guess.
well, I mean, he'll be replaced in short order.
Yeah.
It's not as though people in the U.S. are going to stop doing drugs now.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, the Trump administration has made going after drugs and cartels something of a priority. And so there has been a shift of resources in that direction. Thus far, the most dramatic example of that has been the military going after the alleged drug boats in the Pacific and the Caribbean, which, by the way, they're still blowing up. That never stopped. Still don't know much about how they're identifying them or any real verification as to who it is they're actually blowing up there, but they are still doing it. I did read, as part of this story, that the government also, this is the U.S. government, set up a task force that has the purpose of mapping out cartel networks, so leadership, distributors, etc. So that's not necessarily unusual, and it seems almost weird to say that regarding something the Trump administration does. But yeah, it is normal for administrations to kind of have different national security priorities and to allocate resources accordingly. So this actually is them coloring in the lines for once. They want to focus more on it. They got some national security resources, some departments, agencies, what have you, together, and they got a little task force going. And the task force in question has apparently been working with the Mexican government to try to get better intelligence on just who leads this, that, or the other cartel, where they're located, etc. And apparently that information is what was used here to get this guy. So, it is a form of progress. The United States always could have done more to help Mexico. Mexico always could have done more to crack down on the cartels. They're doing both. And that'll have some deterrent effect on the cartels, but as we've discussed before, the underlying driver remains unaddressed. That being the United States being the most massive drug market in the history of the human race. That's not changing. So the incentive is still there to traffic drugs into the United States. And just given the god tier money you can make doing it, like, there's always going to be takers. You can kind of tamp down on the size and power of cartels, but they're not going away. That's not really, that's not in the cards, as I understand it anyway. It's kind of like fighting an insurgency, like in Iraq or Vietnam. You can kill a couple guys here or there, maybe even a lot of guys over time, but there's always going to be new recruits, right? The underlying driver is still there. The unpopular government propped up by unpopular foreigners is always going to have people who hate it enough to try to overthrow it. And so as much as you might be successful in, targeting insurgents or their leaders, there's a kind of Darwinian ratchet where there's always new ones and they're constantly learning from their failures and getting more effective over time. The Israelis call it mowing the grass. For them, it's kind of, from their perspective, necessary to just kind of perpetually do that. But they do recognize that as much as they may be good at it, they do have to do it perpetually because it's just going to be an ongoing problem. The opponent, as they define them, is constantly rejuvenating, no matter how bad they are made to suffer in whatever conflict they end up in with Israel. So, groups like cartels are very similar in that regard. They have that same Darwinian ratchet whereby they learn from the mistakes of other groups or their own groups. And the underlying incentive to create or join cartels is still there and will persist. So, if this does become a regular thing, like I said, it could curb the ability of cartels to get drugs into the United States, to commit acts of violence, etc. But I doubt it'll be significant, and it's definitely not going to destroy them. It'll be, at best, a new form of mowing the grass. Yeah, we already saw this with, what's his face, the big Colombian drug trafficker in the 1980s and 90s. Forget his name. He had like a big Netflix show that was popular for a while. Pablo Escobar, I think his name was.
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he was probably one of, if not the biggest, cartel leaders in Colombia back in that time period. And the U.S. government eventually made it a priority to get rid of him, and they did. And everybody was very pleased with themselves. But what they found is that after like a year or two, everything was just back to normal. It did not significantly disrupt the flow of narcotics into the United States. It just redistributed power amongst alternative nodes of power, alternative cartels, alternative cartel leaders, alternative drug trafficking networks. They were all in place and ready to fill the vacuum when Escobar was killed, and they did so relatively quickly. So Mexican cartels are even less centralized than the Colombian cartels were. You know, there's a few big Mexican cartels, but I don't think any of them are like as big as the biggest Colombian ones back in the 80s and 90s. So that means that individual cartels in Mexico are not as threatening as the Colombian ones were, but it also means they're harder to get rid of. You know, being smaller means it's easy to replace them. It's not a big deal from their perspective. Certainly not from the perspective of the big picture. So it's a nice victory to, you know, get rid of this guy, to, I guess, assassinate him. But the overarching strategy is fundamentally flawed, which is basically why Washington has not been doing this up until now. There are gains to be made, but they're pretty marginal. And as I've said frequently before, I suspect the main driver here is more the theatrics. The Trump administration loves theatrics, and going out and killing cartel leaders is exactly the kind of violent, performative violence that the Trump administration has a track record of pushing. So I suspect that's more what's in play here. The actual prospects for traction on change regarding the drug trafficking issue in either the United States or Mexico is pretty meager. But as you say, we will see. We'll see how it plays out.
Oh, and I guess in the silly stuff, there was the tariffs meme has returned. One of our favorites.
Sorry, what?
The tariffs. The memes.
Oh, yeah, tariffs were in the news. The Supreme Court ruling. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a big one. That's definitely one I had notes for.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, though. At least not any more than nothing new per se. Because basically, everything that I was predicting would happen just happened. You know, I figured that the Supreme Court would overrule the tariffs, or at least most of them, and that the Trump administration would then shift gears and implement new tariffs based off of different authorities. And all of that happened basically within 24 hours. So nothing especially shocking. It's not necessarily that big a change. The Trump administration came out after the ruling and announced new Section 122 tariffs, which basically, the way they're implementing them, are going to represent a global 15% tariff on all imports into the United States. So that's effectively going to replace all of the tariffs that were lost, so to speak, because of the Supreme Court overruling them. In some cases, in a lot of cases, it's actually going to increase them because some countries had like 10% tariffs or what have you. So now they'll have 15% as per the Section 122 tariffs. It does represent a notable change in that the Trump administration going forward will not be able to just unilaterally, arbitrarily impose tariffs on individual countries. The way they had been doing it, the way they had been trying to cite IEPA, you know, the Economic Emergency Powers Act, he was interpreting it very broadly, such that he could just impose tariffs out of nothing. There's not really any other authority that allows him to do that. And as the Supreme Court has ruled, he couldn't even do it in the first place with the IEPA. So all of the other authorities that he can use here, up to and including Section 122 here, come with caveats and limitations, and they cannot be used arbitrarily. So the era in which the Trump administration just comes out and imposes new tariffs out of nothing or threatens new tariffs out of nothing, that's probably over. He's still going to threaten tariffs, but now there's going to be a lot more lead time. Some of the authorities, for example, require studies to be done into alleged malfeasance by trade partners. And so that's a process that can take months. I'm sure the Trump administration will find a way to half-ass it so that they can shave that down. But there's going to be lead time. They're going to have to announce that. There's going to be periods of public feedback that will be necessary before they can impose new tariffs using most of the other authorities. It's going to be much more procedural rather than Trump just acting like a king who can do whatever the fuck he wants. And that's going to undermine his authority and leverage in these trade fights that he likes to start. Because a lot of the American leverage in those negotiations was just being able to arbitrarily inhibit trade with the counterparty if Trump felt like it. Now he can't really do it if he just feels like it, certainly not in the short term. It's something that he has to build up to and actually have an excuse to do. And I don't doubt that he'll try, but his wings have kind of been clipped here, regardless of how much wiggle room he may try to achieve here with some of the other authorities. There's just not as much there with what he was working with before.
What was the Supreme Court vote on it again?
6-3.
6-3.
Yeah, which is weird because it's kind of a cut and dry case. It really should have been unanimous. I was kind of curious what the minority opinion was. And from what I was reading and listening to, there's apparently a whole bunch of different opinions. There was no single opinion that all of the justices signed on to, which is a little more common. Here, kind of everybody and their mother had a different perspective on it. But the minority opinion was more focused on the fact, and I thought this was kind of weird, but I guess that's just because I'm not good at the law and don't understand it. But the minority opinion was basically to the effect that the Trump administration technically was wrong, but that it was mostly just a procedural problem and that they'll just use other authorities, and that meant that basically what they were doing was fine. I don't really understand that. That seems like bizarre logic to me. So I strongly suspect that I'm just misreading the opinion out of sheer ignorance. I think I've proved many times on here that law is not my forte, so I'm not going to dig into that too deeply. But yeah, there was some dissent there. But for the most part, most of the justices were on the same page, at least as far as the legality. Again, different judges had different opinions on just what about it was illegal, but apparently it was illegal in enough different ways that there are multiple opinions to that effect.
I see. And the Supreme Court is considered overall conservative, but they should not be partial. They're supposed to be the most impartial branch of government.
Supposed to be, yeah. That's the ideal. Opinions differ on just how close to that ideal we actually are, certainly at the moment. I've heard some very impassioned criticisms from a variety of quarters in American politics over the past couple years. But at least on this one, they pretty much got it. It was a pretty clear-cut case of executive overreach, and they ruled accordingly. So let's see. 1/3 of the Trump administration's tariff revenue comes from tariffs other than those that were implemented via IEPA, which is the one that the Supreme Court ruling regarded. So even though the IEPA tariffs are out now, even if the Trump administration didn't replace it with anything, which again they've not, but if they had not, they still would have continued getting about 1/3 of the same revenue they were getting before. There are lots of other tariffs that have been implemented over the past year and change, basically, that would have been and are unaffected by the Supreme Court's ruling here. On account of the ruling, there is about $175 billion that may end up getting refunded to various companies that have had to pay the tariff, which is a very large amount. Administratively speaking, that's going to be a challenge if they all sue at once to try to get their money back. So this is going to be quite the bureaucratic clusterfuck, at least as far as the refunding effort goes. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's also a little bit unclear how Trump's trade deals that he's negotiated are going to pan out here. A lot of them were kind of conditioned on the Trump administration fixing American tariffs against their country at some specific rate. And now those rates are either falling or being removed. It's unclear how it exactly is going to affect different countries, but all told, there is some question about whether or not the Trump administration can uphold its end of the deals that it negotiated, and in turn, whether or not they will continue to stand. And when I say continue to stand, I basically mean whether or not the counterparties will continue to enforce them. Since, bizarrely, it's the Trump administration, so of course it's bizarre, the trade deals that were negotiated have no real legal standing in the United States because they are basically handshake agreements with the Trump administration. So the administration itself was just setting tariffs at whatever based off of the agreements with no consideration or consultation with Congress, which is how that's supposed to work. And the interesting thing is that most of the counterparties would implement their side of the deal via normal legislative processes. So ironically, the counterparties here, some of which are developing countries, were exhibiting more and better rule of law on these negotiations than the United States was. So a lot of the counterparties actually passed laws that changed their trade policy and tariffs and whatnot according to the deals that were negotiated with Trump himself. And since the terms of those deals anyway have changed on account of the change in U.S. tariffs, there's some question about whether or not they may revisit those. But given that they were laws, it may take time for the respective legislatures to actually go to the trouble of doing that. And everything I've read thus far suggests that that's not going to be a short-term process. Most governments around the world are going to take a wait-and-see approach to see how the Trump administration responds to this before they start blurting out how they're just going to abandon whatever agreement they made with the Trump administration. Since Trump, kind of being known for a retaliatory guy, may crack down hard on countries that do that through some bullshit authority that he may pull out of his ass, or maybe a substantive one, depending on the context and circumstances. So there's going to be a wait-and-see period here, maybe a couple weeks or maybe a month, and then other countries that have deals with the Trump admin are going to start rethinking them. And we'll see how that plays out. It's probably going to differ by country, and will depend on just how dramatically U.S. tariffs changed because of the Supreme Court ruling. In a lot of cases, they probably won't change all that much. The Trump administration, I think, set tariffs on India at 18% after their recent agreement. So now that's going to fall to 15%, which is only really 3 percentage points lower. That's not really a dramatic change. I think there were some countries that did have higher tariffs after the Liberation Day, quote unquote Liberation Day tariffs were implemented, and were not able to get a new deal afterwards that lowered them to something resembling lower levels. Those are the countries that are going to benefit the most from this. So if you live in Lesotho, rejoice. You're in good stead now. I think there's a couple others like that, but not too many. I think most of America's major trade partners did end up getting a deal of some kind with the Trump administration that reduced tariffs back down to something between 10 to 20%. Obviously, China's the exception, but the Trump administration really didn't need IEEPA tariffs to tariff China. China's abuses of various trade agreements and state subsidies, what have you, those are egregious enough and extensive enough that the administration finds it relatively easy to cite other trade authorities to set tariffs against them. So China may not be all that affected by this, and trade negotiations with China will probably continue apace as they have been, more or less unaffected. let's see, what are some other items I had here? So the Section 122 tariffs that are being used here to maintain tariffs at least 15%. The way they've been implemented means that the Trump administration will basically be able to maintain 70% of the tariff revenue that the IEEPA tariffs were bringing in. So it's not fully replacing all of the revenue that the IEEPA tariffs were bringing in, but pretty close. It's a little over 2/3. It's pretty decent overall. So in terms of revenue, anyway, this shouldn't be that big a shock. That's pretty much the gist of it. It's still, it happened like yesterday, so it's still pretty fresh. Mm-hmm. Again, the big question, I think, is how other countries respond to this. And they're going to be waiting for a while before they start getting proactive about it, if they get proactive about it at all. I think the only big statement I saw was the European Union, which was basically arguing that they expected the Trump administration to maintain the end of its deal, its end of the deal, and that if they couldn't, then they would revisit the agreement. And from what I heard, anyway, the European Union has not actually passed the law that is running through the European Parliament that will institutionalize, that will implement basically the trade agreement with the Trump administration legally in the EU. So the Supreme Court ruling happened at a somewhat awkward time in that regard. So the EU may actually not pass that and may prefer to refrain until there's more clarity about what the Trump administration is going to do on trade going forward. I suspect other countries will probably follow a similar course, but we'll see. I'm generally of the mind that a lot of the trade agreements the Trump administration negotiated were largely theater. They generally have these bizarre clauses in them requiring the counterparty to invest, $10 billion, whatever absurdly high amount into the United States over some time frame. And my reading of that is that it was never going to happen, that it was largely just empty promises that would give the administration a good headline, but that there wouldn't be much, if any, follow-up. The Trump administration has kind of been litigating a little bit some of these trade deals with other countries because of perceived foot dragging. They kind of see them taking too long to implement the agreements legally, and that's been bothering Washington a little bit. I think Indonesia and one other one, I don't remember it off the top of my head, had been accosted by U.S. trade officials over the past month or two on those grounds. And that to me speaks to two things. One, the fact that the agreements were never really finalized in the first place. A lot of them are announced as trade deals, but then turn out to be frameworks, the details of which are supposed to be negotiated later. And then two, that a lot of the agreements don't really have how do I say this? Yeah, I don't know how to put it into words quite, but basically they're not concrete enough to move forward. Not just in the sense that they have to be finalized and negotiated, but in the sense that, legally speaking, there's no foundation for them. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, I should stick to just the first point then. I'll try to clean that up later. But yeah, just the agreements don't really have a lot of substance to them, and I always thought that they were basically more theater than not, and that they were probably not going to be fully implemented the way that they were initially announced. So the relitigation of some of the agreements, like with Indonesia, kind of speaks to that. The Supreme Court ruling is going to exacerbate that. And the Trump administration will, I don't know, on the one hand, they could just go back to the table with some new threats based off of new authorities and just kind of go through and renegotiate each agreement. Or they could just use new authorities to threaten countries into maintaining existing agreements. Or they could just let it slide. They could just say, yeah, fuck it. We didn't really care that much in the first place. Probably it's going to be the second option, since the Trump administration does seem to be committed to the bit. They do seem to want to try to pressure countries into adhering to the negotiated agreements to some degree. But again, I don't think there's going to be real follow-up. Like, if you actually look at the substance of what they will end up doing in the trade agreements, I don't think it'll amount to much. The Trump administration will pretend that they're getting more deliverables than they are, which will be fine for them. Again, they love theatrics, so that'll be satisfactory from Washington's perspective, if that's all it is. If they can actually get real concessions, that's even better. But I don't think it really matters all that much to them. So nothing especially unexpected, pretty much played out as we thought it would. We'll see how it plays out over the next month and change.
Interesting. I have been getting blasted with Texas political advertisements leading up to elections, I'm guessing.
Wait, what? Aren't you in South Dakota?
I am, but I have a Texas phone number, so there's someone named Janice who put me on a list. And I get all kinds of conservative Texas propaganda telling me who to vote for, who not to vote for. I've heard that, quote, the libs are trying to turn Texas into California. So that's something you can look forward to.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a common talking point down here. Yeah, there's some guy running for, what is it, the Senate, who's kind of been getting traction on Reddit for what little that means. But yeah, his name is Carahano. I could pronounce it if I saw it in front of me, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But yeah, he's a relatively moderate Democrat, and so he's been getting a lot of traction with the establishment. They see him as being a viable candidate. He's going to lose. He's not going to win, but he's probably one of the more competitive candidates that's run for the Democrats in a statewide office, in Texas in a long time. But there's some question as to whether or not Jasmine Crockett might end up getting the nomination. So there's a little bit of drama there. She's actually the representative for the district I live in, weirdly. I hadn't realized that. You don't always know who your reps are if you're not super dialed into local politics, so it can kind of get by you if you're not paying close enough attention. But yeah, I found out, oh yeah, she is technically my rep. Who knew?
The South Dakota representatives pay to get advertised on Instagram, even if you're not following political channels.
Oh yeah, Instagram.
Yeah, there's a guy running here in South Dakota for senator who wants to help people pay their bills and to deal with the increase in property taxes. It's sort of like he does shots fired at Kristi Noem, but doesn't do so directly. It's like, I will protect people who have not been doing well during her period, which I guess is kind of generic. That's what you're supposed to do as the up-and-comer politician. You're supposed to fix the problems, so.
I'm a little surprised how early the midterm advertisements have started. I would have thought that might have waited more until summer, but I guess they didn't want to put it off.
Yeah.
Doing it in February.
It's kind of funny to me. It's like I'm getting fresh memes of like stuff that they're using really excited language about, like what the libs are doing and so on. Like they're trying to push people's buttons, and it's kind of funny because I'm not even there. I'm not even a registered voter in Texas, so I don't have a stake in the game. That's your business to figure out. But I think the thing that I got signed up for from Janice or whoever this is definitely conservative, because everything is heavily pro-conservative.
They may have just looked at your demographics and kind of pegged you for a potential GOP voter.
That's true. or that
Just
person,
based
because
off of.
it addresses them by name.
Oh, I see. I don't know. Some people, they just volunteer you for shit.
Could be. I'm going to sign up all the phone numbers in this number set. We're just going to call random people, just going numerically, not even based on anybody. That would be funny. So I guess, overall composition of the U.S. government right now is we have a conservative executive, judicial, and legislative, but it's expected in the next election that maybe legislative is more blue-leaning.
To be more specific, the House is up for grabs. That's what people are focusing on. Most likely, like statistically speaking, the Republican Party will probably hang on to the Senate. The electoral map is not favorable to the Democrats in the Senate for the midterm election. So there's an outside possibility they could get it, but it's not especially likely. But the House, on the other hand, there's potential there. So they may come out of the midterms with the House. That's probably their best case scenario, with some upside in the Senate, but again, relatively unlikely.
And is that going to make the latter part of Trump's term more difficult for him to like get stuff done?
Well, I mean, define get stuff done, because for the Trump administration, getting stuff done is just arbitrarily doing whatever the fuck he wants. It's not as though he's relied on congressional authority for the first year and change of his admin here. So, having or not having Congress doesn't really matter a whole lot.
Let me phrase it another way. If the House goes blue, will he be able to get away with as much stuff?
For the most part, probably yes. The House can censor him, but that doesn't mean anything. I think a lot of the authority to tax is in the hands of the House, if I'm remembering correctly. So they have potential to fuck with him on that. But, the budgeting process in the United States is a total shit show at the moment, and has been for years, but especially at the moment. So I don't know that, unless the Democrats get a large majority, which probably won't happen, then there's probably going to be a large enough Republican minority to fuck with the budget process such that the Democrats in the House will not be able to credibly threaten the Trump administration with significant disruptions to tax revenue to their budget. So I don't know that that's going to be all that effective a tool for them. On something like tariffs, most of the tariff legislation that grants various authorities to the executive involves mechanisms by which Congress can intercede and stop the executive from doing this, that, or the other with the relevant authorities. But again, that's going to take probably a relatively sizable majority in the House for the Democrats to really utilize that. And I think the Senate is also required for a lot of those. And since the Republican Party will probably hang on to the Senate, such that we have a split legislature with a GOP Senate and a Democrat House, I suspect a lot of those mechanisms will not be utilized. There may be some show votes in which the House votes on it symbolically, but it probably won't come to much. And of course, impeachment is just off the table. I mean, everybody should know by now that's not going to go anywhere. So there's nothing to worry about there if you're a Trump supporter, or to look forward to there if you're a Trump hater. That's just a non-starter.
Why does impeachment not work?
You could get into the mechanics of it, but when you get down to it, the basic reason is political calculus. There's enough Republicans that would not vote to impeach him, or more accurately, even if you do impeach him, to remove him as a result of the impeachment proceedings, that it would not result in his being booted out of office. He has enough support in Congress to stop that from happening. In the same way that it did in his first term, it would play out in basically the same fashion. So Trump is mostly safe. His life will be somewhat more difficult if the Democrats have the House, but not extraordinarily so.
I see.
Now, one thing that will be ruled out if the Democrats do get the House is that any realistic possibility of Trump getting his agenda passed via legislation is pretty much off the table, because everybody knows the Dems are not going to work with him. he's too fucking hated at this point. There might be like some rare areas of bipartisan consensus where they could work together. Trump is fundamentally a populist, so there may be some things where some things that are popular with both Trump's base and the Democrats where they could do something, but I suspect issues like that are going to be thin on the ground. It probably won't happen much, if at all. So I think that's notable because we've had 1 year now, actually, of basically unified Republican governance in Washington. And they haven't really done a whole lot with it. Like, most of what Congress has done has been defined more by what they haven't done, which is to rein in the Trump administration. The Trump admin claimed a bunch of powers that they very explicitly did not have, and they somewhat impolitely really asked Congress not to call them on it. And congressional Republicans kind of said, yes, okay, we will refrain from doing that. And they have dutifully done so. But what they haven't done is actually use Congress's powers to pass laws, set taxes and whatnot, to really operationalize anything of what Trump wants to do into law, which is weird for me. Because one of the things I was expecting and kind of watching for was to see how much of Trump's agenda actually ended up codified into law, because that would represent like substantive change. Laws are not generally easy to change once they're implemented. So that could represent a significant contribution. If you like Trump's politics, anything that he wanted that was codified into law could represent a substantive change and contribution to American public policy. And any corresponding changes to American society could in turn also be attributed to that effort. And so that could represent a major change. Maybe not a significant change in the long run, but at least a significant political achievement that would have legs beyond the Trump administration, after it ends. And it hasn't happened yet. And I was kind of surprised by that. Maybe I shouldn't have been. The Trump administration in this term and in his first term was never known for working especially well with Congress. And when I say that, I don't just mean congressional Democrats, like also congressional Republicans. Like he just doesn't seem to want or desire to coordinate with them much at all. In so much as his administrations do coordinate with them, generally it's one of his employees. I don't want to say supplicants, that it's not quite right. But one of the people in his administration, like his chief of staff, or one of his other point men, they'll kind of take initiative and deal with Congress when there's something there to be done. But beyond that, Trump himself doesn't seem to take point on any of that. He just seems very disinterested in the actual tedium, the actual minutia of governance and getting things done in Washington. Getting things done for him is just doing stuff with or without permission. And then he has everybody else just kind of deal with it. And, you can make things happen in the short term that way, but like, as far as long-term achievements, you do need legislation. And I can't really think of anything off the top of my head in that regard that's going to have legs, that's going to last. Now, there's still, like a year, and there's roughly a year until November. Less than that. But so there's still time for him to do that. It could still happen. But from what I've seen in the first year of the Trump administration, Congress seems mostly focused on either culture war bullshit, the Epstein files thing still drives me crazy, and arguing about the budget. The budget thing has been fucking crazy over the past year. Like, it's been dysfunctional in the past, but we're reaching lofty new heights in stupidity here. Like, the whole budgeting process is now just a circus. Like, we're kind of approaching banana republic territory with that. It used to be an orderly process that had issues, but it would be done on time, and you would have a budget for the year for the government, and that just rarely happens anymore. The whole thing is just mired in the morass of partisan politics. Now, on the one hand, that's bad. You do want your government to be functional and to operate normally, but the upside, if you're skeptical of the Trump administration, is that it has successfully distracted Congress from engaging in any real substantive legislative efforts that might actually push the needle forward on some of the Trump administration's priorities. Consider that the Supreme Court, having struck down the Trump administration's IEEPA tariffs, consider Congress could jump in here and pass a law that just gives him the authority to do all of that shit. They could very easily make all of that legal so that he could just do what he was doing before, but with congressional backing. And I think it's kind of notable that they have just kind of chosen not to do that. And it's not entirely clear to me why. I think maybe they don't have the votes, but Trump is pretty good at whipping congressmen. Like when it comes to trying to get congressmen to vote the way he wants, just a combination of threatening primaries or just shit talking. He has different tools, but he's been pretty good at that. But for whatever reason, it hasn't been an issue. It hasn't come up at all. So maybe somebody more in tune with the politics or with what's going on in Congress may know better. But I haven't heard anything as to just why they have not made that move or why the Trump administration hasn't demanded it. Like you'd think they would. They clearly don't have a problem demanding Congress do shit. So you'd think they'd make a priority of demanding Congress give them authority to do tariffs in a Trumpian fashion, and like it hasn't happened. It's kind of mysterious to me. Maybe the optimist in me wants me to believe that there really is just a secret wellspring of opposition, bipartisan opposition to doing that, but not enough opposition for them to stop him. Like, we won't give him the authority, obviously not. That would be crazy. But we're also not going to stop him. We'll let him spaz out for a while and then just kind of outsource responsibility for reining him in to the Supreme Court. That's kind of pathetic. That's not, that's not how our political institutions are supposed to work. But that seems to be where we're at right now, regrettably. That is a form of institutional rot. But I guess it does eventually, in a circuitous fashion, result in the rule of law being observed. So at least there's that.
Well, it's not really a maybe serious political issue, but I would guess it's an issue that is at least marginally meaningful to you. Hockey, Olympics.
Yeah, I heard the American men and women's team both won gold.
Mm-hmm.
In overtime. Mm-hmm. 2-1. Same scores even.
Yep. Very epic games too. I saw the 2 goals that the U.S. got versus Canada. Apparently it was a really good game, and the U.S. goalie played crazy well. So,
yeah, Hallebuck, I think his name was.
Yeah. One of the shots my dad showed us while we had dinner, he was like, this is one of the highest skill shots I've ever seen. He knocks the puck up in the air over the sticks of 2 defenders, and then before the puck hits the ice again, he hits the puck in the air again. And then he knocks the stick of one guy out of the way so that he can go past him. And then he hits with the back of his stick the puck into the net. He's like doing a heckin' trick shot multiple times, juggling it in the air before he goes for the shot. It's like,
and that was at the Olympics?
Yes. U.S. versus Canada.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a kind of known move that's made the rounds online before. There's a couple kids in college that have done it, and I think one guy at the NHL did it at one point. But it's a very difficult move, like you say. I don't think it's ever been done at the Olympics before. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
I think I was reading today that this is the first time that both the men and women's U.S. hockey teams have both won gold in the same Olympics. So kudos to them. Condolences to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
They must be very upset.
Yep, well, at least they won curling.
Yeah, there's that, in spite of all the controversy.
Yep. It's very funny. I was asking my parents, I was like, don't we have like a rivalry with Russia? Like, was Russia not playing hockey, or did they not make it very far? And they were like, oh no, they couldn't compete because of the war in Ukraine. It's like, oh.
I thought it was because of the drugs.
No, that was the previous Olympics. This time it was the war in Ukraine. They get disqualified for different reasons.
God damn.
Yep.
I can't catch a break.
Well, at least they got the gold medal in getting disqualified.
That's pretty good. Fair point. Yeah, I do kind of feel sorry for like the individual athletes who didn't do anything wrong and just genuinely want to compete. That kind of sucks for them.
Yeah.
But like, what can you do?
Well, they said that they can compete under an independent flag. So it's not for the nation of Russia. You're just an athlete who's an independent.
Oh, are they doing that again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember them doing that in the previous Olympics.
Yeah, so there were probably some Russian athletes.
Gotcha. Okay. So you can come, you just can't have your flag. You just have to compete in shame.
Yes. Yes, basically.
Understood.
So you could say that that's part of the rest of the world's. It's not a sanction, but it kind of is. Sanction on Russia as you can't be in the Olympics. Even though it's really fun. It's going to be really fun this year, the most fun Olympics ever, and you can't go because of the war.
Well, better luck 4 years from now.
Yeah.
Actually, where is the next Winter Olympics going to be? It's going to be in France? Huh. French Alps. It's a pretty nice region of the world. Should be fun. And then what, the next Summer Olympics are going to be 2028?
Feels like we're living in the future with these far forward years. 2028. It's like, whoa.
It makes me feel old. It really does. Because these are the years that I saw in sci-fi movies growing up.
Yeah.
Like in the futuristic year 2010. Like, oh man, that's more than 10 years ago now. Like, geez. And we still don't have any cool, well, we have some cool sci-fi stuff, but
We have lots of cool sci-fi stuff. Most of it's just in a video game.
yeah. Telecommunications is like the real technological miracle of the past couple decades. That's been the big thing. I don't think there's a lot of sci-fi stories back in the day that really kind of homed in on that. I'm sure there's some smart guys in chat who will have some counterexamples. I'm not super well read on the sci-fi literature, so I welcome examples to the contrary. But like the sci-fi that I saw and read back in the day, yeah, it was not about that. It was not about the miracle of telecommunications. But it doesn't feel that miraculous, honestly. After a while, it just kind of becomes the norm. And we abuse the shit out of it. Like we could do real cool stuff with the internet, and instead we just use it for like porn and video games and shit talking, radicalization. Like it's kind of a mess. We could have done it better. Maybe we will in the future, but we seem to still be in the phase of figuring things out. How do we adapt our institutions to this new technological reality? We have to abuse them first, then we'll figure it out later. That seems to be the trajectory. So the 2028 Summer Olympics are going to be in Los Angeles.
Ooh.
Interesting choice. I guess they've had them before. Makes some sense.
One thing that they're very good about doing, because they have a shitload of money, is being able to clean up an area for a short-term event. That's one of the reasons why they have so many cool-looking movies that are shot in Los Angeles and Hollywood that
Gotcha.
make the city look very flattering, but it's pretty lived in, kind of dirty and used whenever it's not like pre-cleaned for a shot or something. So for the Olympics, I would guess that it would be pretty nice. It's going to be very expensive for international people, but I guess if you have enough money to go to an Olympics, you have a decent amount of money already. But LA is one of the most expensive cities in the world, so that'll be an element for it. I don't know where they're gonna like build all this stuff, because it's pretty suburban, sprawled, and packed.
Well, do they need to build anything? Don't they still have a lot of the old infrastructure from previous international events?
Maybe.
I would have assumed so anyway. I'm sure they'll build some new stuff, but I would have thought they'd already had a lot in place. Well, there's also the World Cup this year, some of which will regrettably be taking place in Dallas, very much against my will.
Oh,
I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it, and I want it to go away. But so it go. Some people just had to have the fucking World Cup in Dallas. I don't know why.
well, you can lay low, stay inside, play video games.
That's what I was going to do anyway.
It's your survival plan.
Regardless of context or circumstances, that was going to be the plan. But still, I resent it. All that money that they're going to spend on it, you could have spent it on anything else. I mean, it's not even that popular a sport here.
Yeah, it's the other football that they prefer.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, they kind of got a funky arrangement. It's not just going to be in Dallas. It's going to be like in a variety of cities.
Within
Yeah,
the
it's partly going
Metroplex?
to be, huh?
Within the Metroplex?
No, it's going to be like in different cities in Mexico, the US, and Canada, and Dallas is just going to be one of them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they got it real spread out. It's not all going to be in one place. Even so, I'm still resentful. I don't care. It should not be here at all. But they did at least do me the service of mitigating the damage and expense in this way. Oh yeah, here's a list on the Wikipedia. So it's going to be LA, San Francisco, Seattle, Vancouver, Dallas, Guadalajara, Houston, Kansas City, Mexico City, Monterey, Atlanta, Boston, Miami, New York City slash. It just says NY/NJ. I assume that's New York City,
In New Jersey?
Philadelphia, and Toronto.
Huh.
Yeah, it's a nice spread.
Sports.
North America.
The Seahawks won the Super Bowl, which was good for our family. We are Washingtonians, so seeing our team rise to greatness a few years back, and they've been a really strong team lately. There were some periods where Seahawks are pretty weak, so you cheer for them, but you don't expect them to win. But lately they've been very strong.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think that was a 70s franchise, no?
Sounds about right.
I'm going to look it up. I think it was an expansion team in the 70s, 1976. Yeah. I'm old enough to still think of that as being relatively recent, even though it's absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
So that feels like one of the younger teams to me. Most of the rest have much deeper roots, going back to like the early 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah, they are newer in that sense, but compared to like what are the newest ones? Houston Texans, I feel like is kind of new.
2003, I think, yeah.
The Tennessee
They really
Titans.
shit the bed on the name. They could have done so much better.
Dude, Texans are crazy. I think it's a good name.
I mean, it just feels so vanilla. I mean, there's Oilers was good. That was perfect for Houston. They should have just gone back to that. They should have bought the rights from who was it they became? The Tennessee Titans, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, get the rights from them. Just be the Oilers again. It fits the city so well.
Mm. But
Texans serves its purpose, but Oilers is better. Sorry, go ahead.
what is an oiler? Like, what does that do? Is it someone who has oil? You're just rich? I think the mascots are supposed to like fight each other, right?
I think it's somebody
It's a
who
bear.
works in the oil industry, you know?
Yeah, but that's not like a bear or a hawk or a fucking wolf or whatever. Come on, like what is that?
Hey, those guys are roughnecks. They can hold their own against those animals. They're
Okay,
tough guys.
Oilers will do whatever it takes to get the oil.
Yeah. Yeah, go onto YouTube and see some of the older oil rigs and the manual labor it takes to work them. It's not easy.
Did I tell you about the local South Dakota arrest that happened in my town of the burglar?
I don't think so. If you did, I forgot.
Okay, this is really good. The sheriff's log is something that kind of reports on what's been happening recently in town. And there was recently a attempted burglary at one of the properties that's kind of near where I live. It's in the same town anyway. And there was a guy who he had broken into a property once, and he did so again. But the second time he went, there was someone hiding inside waiting for him because they kind of anticipated the time frame he was going to try. And the person breaking into the establishment had a knife, and they were trying to sort of use the knife and some tools to lockpick a safe inside the home. And it turned out the homeowner came out of the shadows with a gun and held the burglar at knife point until the sheriff arrived. And then they were taken into custody. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty funny. If you think about, like, trying to rob someone in a rural community is, like, really, really dumb. Because it's basically going to be a gun situation. Because almost everyone out here has a gun at a bare minimum to deal with the wildlife that's here.
Yeah.
If a cougar or a bison is running at you, the gun is your only option, realistically, to deal with that.
Yeah.
So everyone out here has guns. In other parts of America, there are boars or there are wolves or other things, but it just seemed really unwise to try to burgle a home with a knife in gun country.
Well, you know, people kind of imagine rural areas as being idyllic, but they do have their problems. There generally is not as much crime as in cities, but the rural America has its share, for sure. It does happen. And like you say, it's generally not like, you know, they're not master cat burglars, the people who do
Yeah.
these things,
That's true.
right? They tend to be kind of dumb, you know. And you know, I think a lot of the impetus is pretty much the same as, you know, burglary in urban areas. You know, it's drugs. Often, you know, in other cases, it's organized crime, although that's less prominent, I think, in rural areas. But it's fairly similar. The broad contours, anyway, are similar. Rural areas kind of get an unfair advantage on urban areas in terms of reputation. People kind of get the wrong idea. There are rural areas in the United States that have very high crime.
Oh, yeah.
They just don't get as much attention as, like, you know, the Chicagos the Detroits, Dallas back in its day. We were number one for a while. Dallas was the number one murder capital of the United States when I was a kid.
Wow.
I was surprised to find we lost the title a while back.
Yeah, one of the other consequences, not to like overly praise gun ownership, there was another person in town, this was maybe a couple years ago, who had a gun on a shelf in their home, and the gun did not have the safety on. And the guy bonked the shelf, the gun fell off the shelf and fired and shot him through the leg. So he's still alive, but he did learn what a gunshot feels like.
Yeah.
Ouch. Stay safe, chat.
Yeah, some people gotta learn the hard way. If you're gonna have them, you gotta use them responsibly. It's a tool, not a toy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Seattle used to have a basketball team, right?
Yes, Sonics.
And then they lost it to Oklahoma. Is that right?
I don't recall.
Oklahoma City Thunder, I think, is what they turned into. So Seattle hasn't had one since then. But as part of my semi-annual Googling of which sports leagues are considering expansion, I discovered that the NBA is looking at expanding back into Seattle. So you may have one back before too long.
Interesting. Yeah, Seattle recently got a hockey team, which they have not had for a long time.
Yeah, 1920s. Seattle Millionaires.
Speaking of like rich mascots, you got the Oilers and the Millionaires.
Yeah.
The Seattle Crypto Bros. Yo, you have to hear about this new coin.
Yeah, the Millionaires back in the day were actually in the NHL, kind of. It's a little complicated. Way back in the day, there were actually two leagues. The NHL was one, and then I think the other one was like the Western Hockey League, something like that. And then whoever the champion of the respective leagues was would play against the other for the Stanley Cup. And that's how the Stanley Cup was awarded way back when. Yeah, I don't remember if the Seattle Millionaires ever won it. And I don't think any of the Western Hockey League teams ended up in the NHL. Yeah, the Great Depression kind of fucked over all of them in the end.
Wow.
Whole bunch of pro hockey teams folded over the course of the Great Depression, unfortunately so, including the Great New York Americans. The New York Americans were one of the older pro hockey teams, and they actually survived most of the Great Depression, most of the 1930s. But then, like, I think just before World War II started, like 37, 38, they ended up folding. They just ran out of steam. If they could have held on a little longer, they probably would have survived. It's kind of sad. But in the end, they had to fold. So New York lost its other hockey team, and they were stuck with just the Rangers up until the mid-70s when the Islanders were created. Yeah, that's actually the team the Allen Americans are named after. That's the minor league team I was telling you about last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Allen, Texas.
Yeah, that's the inspiration. I do like sports geography. I know it's not. I know it's not really what we're supposed to talk about, but
it's okay.
Yeah, I find it fun. Well, let's see. Oh, well, what was there anything else you wanted to get to here? I think you mentioned there were a couple of things.
Did anything else happen in Iran recently? What's the state there?
No, the negotiations are ongoing. The United States is continuing to build up its military presence. I hear bits and pieces about the negotiations, but like nothing substantive. So I can't really draw any conclusions as to where they are right now. I think what I've read thus far is that the Iranians are maintaining the line that they had pretty much when the negotiations started, which is that they're willing to negotiate the nuclear program, but that they're not willing to negotiate support to proxies in the Middle East or their ballistic missile program. And the Trump administration wants to address all three. So that's kind of where the standoff is right now. I've heard a couple things about the Iranians saying that they're willing to negotiate and are about to present a new proposal. But the deadline for that hasn't been reached yet. They said that they were going to do it, I think, a day or two ago, and that they were a few days away from presenting. So presumably they'll do that tomorrow or in the next couple days. Trump, meanwhile, continues to grandstand. His administration is issuing a lot of signals that are implicitly threatening. I think the one I read today is that Steve Witkoff, the lead American negotiator in the negotiations, was saying that Trump doesn't understand why the Iranians haven't caved in yet. Which, I don't know why I'm hearing about that, but my best guess is that they're trying to threaten Iran. Because that's not the kind of thing you need to tell the press about. So if they are telling the press about that, then I have to assume that they're doing it on purpose, because they basically want to communicate that to the Iranians. They're saying that you really should have come to the table by now and we're running out of patience. Trump himself has said that we're going to know whether or not he ultimately launches strikes on Iran within the next 10 days. And that was a few days ago. Totally needless in the grand scheme of things. I understand he wants to pressure the Iranian government, but it feels very theatrical. The whole theatrical style of negotiation just grates me. It does not seem productive to me, but he insists on it. I think there's been a couple other veiled threats of one kind or another. I think there's been a bunch of American aircraft that have been moving around the region in a way that's very easy to track. Normally when you build up for an attack, you kind of try to keep a low profile, but in the case of the military buildup, it's been very much the opposite. The Trump administration really seems to want everybody to know just how many assets they're moving into the region. So again, all of that, I think, is done on purpose as to generate leverage in the negotiations. I don't think any of it is by accident. I don't really think it's going to work. I think the Iranians are telling the truth when they say they're willing to make concessions on the nuclear program. But I think ballistic missiles are going to be the red line. I think we've discussed it before. Ballistic missiles are the one thing they have in their toolbox, which poses a even mildly credible threat to either the United States or Israel. Without that, all they have are the proxy militia forces in Iraq and Lebanon. And as we saw with the Hezbollah war, or whatever you want to call it, after October 23, there's a real limit to how much damage they can realistically inflict on Israel. It's not much. They can inconvenience Israel. They can basically make Israel evacuate, the northern 10, 20 miles, whatever, of the Golan Heights. But that's about it. That's really more an inconvenience than a threat. So that's not really enough to deter Israel in the grand scheme of things. And we've definitely seen that fail to deter the Netanyahu administration over the past couple of years. So the proxy militias are not ultimately going to be that useful. The proxy militias are only as useful, basically, as Israel and the United States allow them to be by being risk averse. But we don't have risk averse administrations right now, and so that's not very practical. It could be that the Iranian government ends up willing to give concessions on those grounds. They may actually end up caving into demands that they curtail support to the militias because they're just not that useful to them. But the ballistic missiles are different. Those really are useful. Even if they can't realistically do that much damage, even if Israel and the United States can shoot most of them down, there's just no other tool that even poses even a mild threat, really, to Israel and the United States. So I think that's the thing that they're going to hang on to, grim death. And that's probably what the negotiations are mostly hung up on right now. I'm sure there's going to be some minutia about sanctions relief. It's not going to go all at once. There's going to be a series of phases in which the sanctions are slowly unpacked over time, and it's going to be a function of Iranian adherence to whatever terms are part of the agreement. But I'm sure there's going to be back and forth about the pace of sanctions relief, what Iran will have to do, just again, details. They're going to haggle about that for weeks or months or whatever. So there's not going to be an immediate payoff to this, most likely. I know Trump has tried to make it sound like he wants to just go in and assassinate the leadership of Iran, but I'm a little dubious. Maybe he'll kill a couple of people. Maybe he'll even kill the Ayatollah. But making a serious effort to overthrow the government would take way more than that. Even significantly threatening the regime's existence would require a significant air operation, which may be beyond the U.S. government's capability. Well, maybe not its capability, but its willingness, its willpower to do so. Because, again, as I've said before, the Trump administration is fundamentally risk-averse. They don't really like big adventures. They prefer short, victorious adventures, like the Maduro adventure. That went off without a hitch, and then it was over, and then more or less things went back to the status quo ante. Everybody could just kind of forget about it. That's more their style. Like, I don't foresee a protracted air war over Iran is certainly doable given how powerful the U.S. military is, but it would be of a mixed popularity with the American public. It would be extensive, and it would take resources away from other priorities. The U.S. Navy has already taken some assets away from enforcing the pseudo blockade on Venezuela so that they could shore up assets for the Iranian adventure that the Trump administration is pretending to want to go on right now. But I just don't see them doing something more than that. Like an actual ground invasion would really be necessary to actually overthrow the Iranian government. And I think that's really not in the cards. That is well beyond the pale for the Trump administration. They can always surprise me. They've done it before. I'll have to wait and see what they do, just like everybody else. But I'm always skeptical, permanently and always and forever skeptical about the Trump administration's motives and seriousness, because they've just fooled me too many times before, especially in the first term. Once bitten, twice shy, as the old saying goes. So not much new to report on Iran. It's pretty much where it was last week.
I see. Was there anything that stood out to you?
Murder.
Oh.
There was a murder in France. Did you hear about this at all?
I don't think so.
All right. This could be a problem going forward for, France Unbowed, which is the main left-wing coalition in France. And what happened is that there was... This story gets weird, I have to say. Basically, there's a hard-right feminist collective called Nemesis, which is a combination of words I would never think to say, never thought I'd see or say in the same sentence. I do not associate feminist collectives with the hard right, but apparently there is a hard right feminist collective in France. It has a wicked cool name, Nemesis. I actually looked them up on Wikipedia. They've actually got a pretty cool logo too. So, aesthetically they've got it going on there, but it's kind of a weird combination of ideologies. So this collective had a public rally. And at the rally, they asked some far-right activists to provide security. And one of the guys that came out to help them was a mathematics student named Quentin Durank. I'm not going to pronounce it right. I don't know how, so I apologize. My best guess is Quentin Durank. And after the rally was over, he was walking with some of the other guys who had been there, and they encountered some dudes. And they got into an altercation. And so Durank and his friends ran off, but they were chased and eventually cornered, and then they were beaten. So the beating ends. He's still alive, but he's pretty fucked up. And at first, they're just walking away and feeling like shit, but then his condition deteriorates rapidly. And before his friends can get him to a hospital, he actually dies.
Cool.
So this dude is not, he's not quite literally beaten to death, but basically beaten to death. He's beaten and then dies from the injuries shortly thereafter. So it turns out that the guys that were beating them were a part of a youth group associated with France Unbowed. This is a youth group that has provided security at France Unbowed events. And I don't have the name of the group in front of me. It was like LFI or something like that. But it's a far left group. Like, it's a far left group that has issued a lot of incendiary partisan rhetoric in the past. And so you can imagine how this is playing out in French politics. Like, this is kind of supercharging what is already a hyper-partisan political environment there. So, the hard right is, of course, crying foul, and there's accusing the far left of being extremists, and that this guy needs to be held account, but really France Unbowed and all of their fellow travelers need to be held responsible as well for this murder. And France Unbowed, for its part, is trying to not disassociate. They're distancing themselves from the assailants. They're saying that we don't have anything to do with these guys. We disavow them. We don't associate with them. And so it's how people perceive it largely kind of breaks down on individual politics, predictably so. It's playing out exactly how you would expect it to play out in a hyper-partisan environment. But there's a lot of recriminations right now. This is seen as very escalatory as far as political tension. And mind you, elections are coming up, presidential elections. I don't think it's this year, but I think next year. I don't remember off the top of my head. But France's far right / right, again, there's always people who complain when you call them far right. But basically Marine Le Pen's party. They keep changing their name. I think it's National Rally right now. So National Rally is expected to perform pretty strongly in the upcoming presidential election. And Marine Le Pen probably won't be able to run because of a court ruling last year. But regardless of whether she can run or not, like, they're going to have a strong showing. And so everybody is kind of on pins and needles about that. Like, how does that play out? Will the cordon sanitaire around the far right in France hold in the upcoming presidential election, given how much better National Rally is polling? And now this happens. So this presumably will benefit National Rally. And given how close the voting was expected to be, I would think that it'll be even closer now, and maybe even polling will tip in their favor. There's still lots of time. Like, the election will not likely be decided by this. There's going to be other drama for sure. But certainly this is one of the big dramatic events that's going to be a part of the campaigning. Like, for sure, National Rally is going to reference this. They're going to use this. So this is part of the sort of ongoing battle, so to speak, between the populist right and the establishment in European politics. This is the latest flashpoint, so to speak. Let's see. Did we have any questions? I don't think so. Okay. What did you want to hear about Peru?
Sure. What's happening there?
More bullshit.
Oh, no.
Much to my surprise. Like, really, what the fuck is happening in Peru? Like, I've basically lost track at this point. I have tried to follow all of the drama in Peru, and I just fucking can't. There's too many twists and turns. I like to try to think that I can trace back most major political events and political developments in different countries. But like with Peru, there's just too much. It's been going on for like 8 years, and every year there's some wild, dramatic shit that happens. And this year isn't any different. Like it was only 4 months ago that the president was impeached and replaced with somebody new. And that wasn't all that long after the previous president had been impeached. So there's this ongoing drama in Peru that just refuses to resolve itself. It's really wild. So what happened recently, and again, this is just 4 months after, what was his name? Jose Hari was impeached. And he was basically just an interim president. And he didn't even last until they could replace him with somebody formal. He was just removed outright. So Jose Hari was himself impeached. Right. That again was the new guy. 4 months ago, they impeached, what was her name? Let me look it up here. I have it somewhere. No, not him. I don't have her. Oh, there it is. Dina Boluarte. So Dina Boluarte was the temporary interim president who came to power after the removal of the left-wing president who won a presidential election, became president, and then was impeached because he attempted basically to overthrow the government. He attempted an auto gulp in which he tried to remove Congress. And it didn't work. So he was removed. Dina Boluarte becomes the new president. And then 4 months ago, she's impeached, replaced by Jose Hari. And then just recently, Jose Hari was impeached. So apparently the impetus here is that he came under scrutiny after reports surfaced that he met with a Chinese businessman holding a government contract. And he did this without registering the encounter, which he is apparently required to do. And so, somewhat hilariously, Peruvian media is calling this Chifa-gate, which is apparently a reference to some Chinese Peruvian cuisine. Very well named. Bravo. Apparently, there was also some new evidence about a 2024 rape allegation against Hari, which he denies. Of course, they always deny it, so no surprise. So those two things combined were enough to turn public sentiment against him and his political enemies united and have removed him from office. He has been impeached. His replacement is a man named Jose Balcazar. Again, I apologize for mispronouncing all of this. This is my best effort. So he's going to be the new interim replacement. And the funny thing about this guy is that he's actually from the same party as the left-wing presidential candidate whose impeachment kicked all of this off. So the guy who won the presidential election is still gone, but his party is now back in power. The tables have now turned, and they're back in charge. We'll see how long that lasts. Given the trend, probably not very long. But I did find it pretty wild how short the time frame is between impeachments now. They seem to be an almost quarterly occurrence now in Peru.
Yeah, I'd remembered a really high turnover rate. They've not been able to really stabilize.
Yeah, kind of all started back in the day with Odebrecht. Do you remember that?
Remind me?
We talked about it way back when we first started this. Almost 10 years ago now. It's scary to think about almost. Yeah, Odebrecht was a construction company that had contracts all over Latin America, both Brazil and Spanish-speaking Latin America. And there was a leak well, no, it wasn't a leak. It was an investigation by the Brazilian government. It was like some special investigative body within their police. I don't remember exactly the details. But they did an investigation into Odebrecht, and they found out that they had been systematically bribing politicians all over the region for decades. And when they brought them to court, they ended up getting all of the records of like all of the bribes. And it caused a massive shitstorm in South American politics that is reverberating to this day.
Damn.
Like everybody and their mother, all the big leaders, like a huge number of powerful political figures were implicated in the corruption. And that created kind of a minor crisis of legitimacy for any number of governments and political parties in the region. Most of them have kind of stabilized since then to varying degrees. Peru has not. Peru is the one that got the most fucked over by this. And Peruvian politics have just not settled down in the subsequent decade from this investigation. Like, it is, the torrent of shit has just not stopped pouring. It doesn't seem like any political party or politician in Peru can get enough support for long enough to establish a stable government and just govern the country normally. There's just this perpetual power struggle between all of these self-interested actors, and they use leverage from Odebrecht and other minor corruption scandals and just anything they can think of to turn on each other. And the result is a constant churn in government in Peru, to the point where there's just no stable ground politically that any government can stand on. Nobody can last long enough to really do anything. Politics is just about gaining the presidency and maybe a legislative majority for a few months or maybe a year before you just lose it because of competition from rival parties or from within your own party. It's not great. It's not collapsing. Peruvian democracy is not just failing. It's not at risk of political implosion, but it's not functional either. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not ideal. This is the kind of stuff investors don't like. They prefer stable government. Even if it's not good, stable government, even if it's not, good, non-corrupt, even if rule of law is weak, if it's all predictable, then investors know what to plan around.
They would prefer lawful evil to chaotic good.
That's actually true. That is a good characterization of how investors think about investments in the developing world. Predictability is ideal because then they can plan their investments around that. They can calibrate how much risk they expose themselves to with their investment. So even if it's not a great place to do business, if it's predictable, they can make an investment that suits the risk represented accordingly. But if there's instability and unpredictability, you can't do that kind of calibration. You don't know how to adjust your exposure to the risk to reflect the level of risk, because you just don't know how much risk there's going to be. And that puts investors off, and it results in economic problems generally, because you're going to lose money from that. There's going to be an opportunity cost in terms of foregone investment that you would have been able to get otherwise, and that could have propelled you to much better economic growth over the long run. Maybe not as much in the short to medium run, but definitely over the long run. So all this drama in Peru has had an effect. I don't think it's been too bad, economically speaking, but again, the real economic cost is going to be in the long run when you have when you start really seeing the difference between the potential trend line that you could have had and then the actual GDP results. Over the long run, those differences can be very stark. So hopefully they can kind of get it together sooner rather than later, but I don't know who would even want to initiate that at the elite level at this point. It seems like all of the elites in Peruvian politics are in full-on conflict mode. Right? They're not interested in forbearance or negotiation or putting the national interests ahead of their own interests. They're very much feeding at the trough of political competition, regardless of the cost to everybody else. So I don't know how to fix that. That's not a great position to be in. Hopefully they find a way to get out of it soon, but we'll see. But yeah, that's been the drama in Peru recently.
Damn. Did Chile ever get a constitution redone?
Nope. Not even. They tried so hard. For years. For years they tried. I think, 2019, that was the year of the big global protests. Yeah, Chile's was one of them. That was the one that really kicked off the demand for constitutional reform. So they had a whole last constitutional convention, and they agreed on a new constitution. They held a referendum on it, and the referendum failed. And nothing came of it. Nothing happened. And all of that took years. They tried to make it work, and then just nothing.
Yeah.
And now they have a right-wing government again that is not interested in constitutional reform. They have a very right-wing government now. Do you remember that Cast guy we talked about a couple months ago? He's the far-right guy that won the presidency. Yeah. Yeah, he's not going to do left-wing reforms. That's not happening.
I see. Seems like a overall pretty conservative swing globally the past few years.
More so in Latin America. Latin America is kind of switching from red to blue, so to speak. It's been a big shift that's happened a couple times over the past couple decades. They kind of go back and forth. So yeah, Cast in Chile. The Chavistas in Bolivia lost power. They've got sort of a center-right government in power there right now. Colombia will probably have a conservative government soon. I think they've been polling well, and they have elections pretty soon. Ecuador technically has a conservative. They have a conservative president. I don't know how conservative the legislature is, though. They kind of have a split government situation in Ecuador right now. Excuse me. Argentina has, what's his name? Javier Milei. So he definitely qualifies. I think, didn't Uruguay get a conservative president recently? I don't know. There's very little reporting on Uruguay generally. I don't quite remember. But yeah, there definitely has been a swing. Yeah, in the rest of the world, there has been a populist upsurge. You can see that manifest in any number of countries. Europe is maybe the most pronounced, but that's mostly because it's part of the developed world, so you don't expect populists to necessarily be as successful there. And also they have freedom of speech and whatnot, so you hear more about it than you would in, say, like fucking Uganda. Yeah, Uganda, they're trying to have a populist upsurge, but the government is kind of poo-pooing it. I think the lead opposition politician there is a guy called Bobby Wine. He was actually a DJ, if you can't guess by the name.
Bobby Wine.
Bobby Wine, that's his name. He ran for president in their recent presidential election, and unsurprisingly, the government rigged it, and they've been hounding him after the election because he refuses to recognize the result. Yeah, Uganda's dictator is a little bit... Well, Uganda's dictator is not too bad in the grand scheme of things. He's prototypical dictator. He runs a tight ship, but otherwise he's mostly just interested in making money. His son, on the other hand, is kind of a psycho, and I think everybody in Uganda, if not in East Africa generally, is kind of low-key worried about what's going to happen when his father dies. Because his son is a little much. Like, his father will go through the normal minutia of trying to intimidate people ahead of an election, disappear some people, dictator stuff. It's unfortunate, but it's not unexpected. Everybody kind of knows what to expect out of that. But his son will just go on to fucking social media and brag about torturing people in his fucking basement.
What the fuck?
He's gone on social media and threatened to go to war with fucking Kenya. The guy's a little bit unhinged.
Oh no.
His father has had to rein him in multiple times.
When your dictator father is reining you in, you've gone pretty far.
Yeah, it's not great. It's a very awkward situation for the region and for Uganda. But his father seems to insist on grooming him to replace him. So he's presumably going to be president of Uganda sooner or later. God knows what's going to happen at that point. It's going to be a ride. Yeah, the guys that successfully seize power in a country kind of tend to fit a profile. They tend to be violent, egotistical, but they also tend to be very disciplined. They tend to be fairly restrained in a lot of ways, at least in the ways that are important to maintaining a hold on power. Their children tend to just be fucking sociopaths. Like, they're not raised right. They don't have any restrictions. They just do whatever the fuck they want. And they don't learn that same discipline that their father generally had. And so they ended up being like really bad at governance correspondingly. Rare is the son who inherits a dictatorship from his father who ends up being good at it. It just doesn't happen much.
Spoiled rotten, I believe, is the distinction.
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Well, let's see. I did have a little item on Bangladesh. So as we talked about, I'm very skeptical about whether or not the BNP is going to be able to shake its history as being basically just a corrupt vehicle for the Rahman family, which I believe is the family that effectively runs the party. What was it? Sheikh Hasina is the one who ran the Awami League, and then I want to say Rahman is the one who led. Kia Zaleed? Oh, fuck, that's going to bug the hell out of me. What was her name? Bangladesh. Oh, wow, I'm way off. Google is failing me hard here. Khalid Zia, here we go. Or Khalida Zia. Yeah, she was married. Wait, it wasn't married, was it? No, it was married. Yeah, she was married. Khalid Zia was married to the dictator of Bangladesh in the 1980s when BNP was running it as a one-party authoritarian, one-party state. And eventually, her father was overthrown. She was kicked out, and she inherited the BNP from him. And she had been in charge of it ever since. Eventually, she lost a power struggle with the Awami League leader. I just said her name. What was her name? Damn it. My memory is not doing too good right now. But basically, she lost a power struggle, and she ended up in jail. Which basically, in like political competition, corrupt democracy terms, is like about as hard as you can lose a political battle without being just outright killed. So she was out of it for several years while the Awami League ran the one-party state, at least a de facto one-party state. And then the Awami League was overthrown in the revolt, what was it, like a year and a half ago or whenever it was. And it looked like she would kind of just float back into power, like by default, since the BNP had been the main opposition party. But then she actually died. Like not long after she was finally released from prison. So her party now is being run by her son. And it's not entirely clear how her son is going to run things. Her son had been groomed to inherit the party. So presumably he has at least some skill and talent at doing so. But he's also very inexperienced. Like, he never had a chance to really inherit control of the party. So this is going to be his first crack at government. Or at governing, rather. And the big question is, what's he going to do? Like, is he just going to run it as his family's personal fiefdom, as they had in the past, or is he actually going to try to improve governance in Bangladesh such that there can be improvement in the quality of public policy, a reduction in corruption, economic improvement, etc., all the good stuff downstream of good governance? So I'm extremely skeptical about that, but I saw some good news recently that's worth talking about, which is that the BNP is actually supporting a political reform program. Part of that involves term limits and creating a bicameral instead of unicameral legislature. So I think there was a third item, but I don't think I wrote it down. But those were the two main ones that stuck out to me. For one, term limits is a big deal. Because generally, when these parties get into power, they have established leaderships, often family leaderships, basically, that just hang around for as long as they can. They feel no particular compunction to step down and make room for somebody else. So term limits will make that harder. And switching from a unicameral to a bicameral legislature, that'll be somewhat helpful in so much as it creates more checks on power. If one party gets control of both, the lower and upper house of the legislature, then it's kind of a moot point. But it at least creates another barrier to entry to a government that just wants to do whatever the fuck it wants. So that's not a panacea, but it is at least an improvement. And the fact that the BNP is supporting these measures, I think, is a good sign. We'll see if it actually means anything in practice, because ultimately, whether or not you have better or worse government comes down to the willpower of the people in power. The actual people in seats, the actual legislators, the president, etc. If those people want to bend the rules, then it almost doesn't matter how many rules or precedent or how much precedent you have in place. If they want to break the rules, they're going to do it. They will find a way, for sure. So what you really need is to establish as a norm that people don't do that, or even better, that voters don't vote them into fucking power. But that's a whole conversation unto itself. But yeah, getting that norm in place is key. So if the BNP wants to do this stuff, but then doesn't follow through with a change in the political culture within the BNP and within the broader, body politic of Bangladesh, then it's going to be pretty meaningless. But if we choose to remain optimistic, we can say that this shows that they are interested in a reformist approach to governance and that this could augur good things going forward. Something else to keep our eye on.
Keep trying your best, Bangladesh.
And let's see, I think we did get a couple questions, looks like.
Sure.
Let's see. Some say Ecuador was also hit by the Odebrecht scandal, but instability evolved differently. What are your thoughts? Well, Ecuador's issue partly is crime. That's been like the big thing over the past, let's say 5 years or so. That's not necessarily unusual for Ecuador, though. There's kind of been a big uptick in crime in a number of countries in South America. That's probably due to multiple factors, but the one I see cited the most often is Venezuelan migration. A lot of Venezuelans have left Venezuela and ended up in places like Chile, Ecuador, Brazil, what have you. And there's enough of them that then get involved in crime that there's kind of a sense that they're troublemakers, basically. They kind of get blamed unfairly for a lot of stuff, but there has been some correlation in escalation in crime with Venezuelan migration, and they're kind of suffering for that. So that's part of the reason for the escalation in crime. Some of it just has to do with changes in drug routes. They kind of tend to go with the path of least resistance, and every so often something changes in terms of corruption, networking, public policy, unintended consequences, or some combination of the above that leads cartels or other drug traffickers of one kind or another to shift their route through a new country. And when they do, that generally augurs increased crime and violence. And the downstream political effect of that is generally pressure on the incumbent government for failing to deal with it, or at least a perception that they're failing to deal with it. So crime, the same crime wave, so to speak, that has affected the rest of South America has definitely hit Ecuador. And in Ecuador's case, it kind of overshadowed a bit Odebrecht. maybe more so than say, Peru. Certainly in the case of Peru. Crime is definitely a factor in Peru, but the knock-on effects the knock-on effects of Odebrecht that destabilize Peruvian politics, they're still reverberating in a way that you don't see in other places. So I think Ecuador is kind of similar to other countries in the region in that crime is sort of the more recent driver, more so than Odebrecht. So I don't know that it necessarily evolved differently in that way. Differently than Peru, sure. Again, Peru is just reeling and has been for some time. But in the case of Ecuador, I don't think the major drivers within their politics are necessarily different than, say, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. Again, crime, cartels, etc., have played an outsized role in politics there. Although I would point out that in the case of Ecuador, that's more justified than in Chile. Because even if there has been an increase in violent crime in Chile, it pales in comparison to what's been happening in Ecuador. In Ecuador, there was a violent gang that outright raided a TV station while they were on air and even stepped in front of the fucking camera. Very bold. Like, you could just straight up see their faces and everything. They didn't give a shit. They just busted into this studio while they were doing the news, I think it was. And they just rounded up the crew, the anchors, everybody. And just kind of started walking around and making demands.
Damn.
Yeah, I remember when it happened and thinking it was wild. So there's been more of an uptick in violence from organized criminal groups in Ecuador. And I think they also assassinated some politicians, too, who were running on an anti-crime, anti-organized crime platform. So in Ecuador, it's very much understandable why crime would have become like the major driver of politics. I don't think you've seen violence nearly that bad in, like, again, Chile or some of the southern cone places like that. So yeah, I think that's why Ecuador and the rest of Latin America evolved differently than Peru. Just varying levels of crime, I think, have been an important factor. And Odebrecht has faded in most countries in the region, such that crime was able to supplant it as the major political issue. By contrast, in Peru, like, none of that fucking happened. Odebrecht, the waves caused by Odebrecht just haven't faded with time in the same way, and crime hasn't been as bad as Ecuador or some of the other places. I would emphasize that it's still been bad. I think we talked a couple weeks ago about there was a guy running for office, and he ended up getting into a shootout with some criminals that encountered. I don't think they were even looking to fuck with them. They just kind of happened to cross him at one point, and he ended up getting in a gunfight with them. So yeah, there's definitely been issues, but Ecuador is kind of in a league of its own in that regard. I think I did read that trafficking networks shifted into Ecuador, and that this is one of the reasons why they had an uptick in crime. So in their case, it's not just like Venezuelan migrants or increased instability in the Ecuadorian economy pushing people into gangs. Nothing like that. It just kind of is a shift in trafficking routes that has occurred to the detriment of the Ecuadorian people. Let's see, anything to share about the politics of Costa Rica, going there next month for the first time and just curious? You ask at an interesting time, because they actually just had an election. And I think the conservatives won again. It's the populist conservatives that have been winning recently. The incumbent, who was not allowed to run again because I think they have a one-term limit, but the guy who won the previous presidential election was an evangelical Christian populist. And the new president incoming that won the most recent presidential election is of the same party and has the same politics, at least as I understand it. So, yeah, they're kind of in a populist mood in Costa Rica, it would seem, which kind of surprises me because, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of drama happening there. If there is, I haven't read about it. Costa Rica is generally held up as an example of a very successful Central American state. Their economy is good. Their political system is considered one of the most, if not the stable, really. I think it is the state. I think Costa Rica's government is the most stable in Central America. Thinking about it now, I think they're sort of the gold standard in the region. And they have a long history, a long unbroken history, I might add, of democracy. They had like a coup back in the 1940s, and that was the last time they had any significant upheaval. It's been relatively clear sailing since then. So yeah, it's a prosperous little Central American country. It does well for itself, has a strong tourism industry. I think they've got a little bit in the way of agricultural exports, some fruit, bananas, that kind of thing. But beyond that, like, no big problems that I'm aware of. They probably had an increase of crime. Everybody in the region seems to have experienced that. But I haven't heard about the degree of increase in Costa Rica. Maybe it's high, but if it is, nobody's writing about it, at least not in international news. So yeah, I'm a little surprised they've gone populist given how well they were doing. But for reasons that I'm not sufficiently familiar with Costa Rican politics to understand, they have shifted in that direction. But even so, even with the populist shift, I don't think it's getting crazy. I haven't heard about populist governments in Costa Rica like going out and doing crazy shit. Again, Costa Rica is kind of, Central America in general, really, is one of those regions of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention in international news. And since that's more what I read, it could easily be the case that I'm missing out on a lot of what's happening there. So maybe I don't have all the details, but yeah, as far as I know, it's a pretty cool place. I mean, obviously, if you're going there for vacation, it's doing something right. People don't go to like Iraq for vacation. If a place is dangerous, generally it puts people off. But Costa Rica has a very positive reputation, and so it tends to attract a lot of tourists for that reason. And it's well earned. It's justified. They take care of their shit pretty well down there, especially in comparison to a lot of their neighbors.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned evangelical Christian candidate because my family has been involved in missionary work there for some decades now.
Yeah, evangelicals have been very successful in Latin America. So much so that Brazil is, well, if current trends hold anyway, and they would have to hold for several decades, and long-term predictions are always suspect. Anything can happen. But if current trends hold for the next couple decades, Brazil will be a Protestant country, or I should say a majority Protestant country. Evangelicals have been very successful there, and there are more and more conversions every year. So it could be that the Catholic population is actually only the second largest religious group, the second largest denomination, let's say, within Brazil, which would be a wild change, because that's been a very Catholic country for a very long time.
It's interesting, too, that I think for people outside of South America, you can conflate Brazil with broader Latin American culture when there's some overlap, but a lot less than you think because it's a different language. So a lot of their like music and like major defining pieces of cultural literature and stuff, it's not going to be the same. And they have a different lineage. Instead of being former Spanish Empire and colonies, it is Portuguese.
Yep.
And I think it was last week or the week before you talked about the royals of Portugal at one point just decided to up and move to Brazil because they thought it was better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the gist of it. It was the prince who had basically been left in charge of Brazil while his father went back to Portugal after the Napoleonic Wars. And while the son was just kind of hanging out there, he was like, you know what, fuck it. I'd rather just be emperor of Brazil. I really don't need Portugal. Thus began the Empire of Brazil, which was the formal name of the country upon independence.
I was reading about a region of Brazil that's more on the coast, the Atlantic coast of it, far from the Amazon, and it's more of an arid area. There's some more like semi-arid territory in the coastal Brazilian region.
Yeah, it would be the northeast.
Apparently, that's where a lot of the Portuguese settlers decided to live because there weren't as many like jungle diseases and stuff as further inland.
Yeah, the temperate areas kind of were more attractive. It was just easier to live there. Yeah, there were two regions that the original Portuguese settlers kind of focused on. One is the area you're talking about in the northeast, and then the other one is the area kind of in and around Rio de Janeiro, more in the south. Yeah, Brazil was originally carved up way back in the 1500s into a series of what were called captaincies. And each captaincy was given to, as you would expect, a captain who was supposed to run the territory on behalf of the Portuguese crown. And interestingly, a lot of people just didn't bother because they didn't like the land. It was not super productive. It wasn't like, the Aztec Empire or the Incan Empire where you had really strong native kingdoms already in place that were very wealthy, such that it attracted the attention of would-be adventurers like the conquistadors. Brazil really didn't have that. What they did have was a lot of jungle and other sort of tropical territories and climes that were not very attractive to Europeans. It was very difficult for them to live in places like that without, dying of malaria, dying of just whatever other tropical diseases they might get. It was rough going. And there wasn't really a lot of easy ways to make money off of these territories at first. So just if you're a captain that was given a captaincy in Brazil in the 1500s, you could very easily look at that and say, you know what, it's not worth it. Fuck it. I don't want this. So a surprisingly large number never even went to Brazil, and of the ones that did go to Brazil to run their captaincy, most of them actually ended up abandoning the territory. So of all of the original captaincies, there were only 4 that actually became successful and have lasted up till the present. 2 of them were in the northeast, again, the same area you were mentioning, and then 2 were in and around present-day Rio de Janeiro in the south. Those were the 2 most successful areas. And modern Brazil basically traces its history back to those colonies. They expanded outward and eventually filled in the space in between and then pushed into the interior. Yeah, the Northeast ended up becoming immensely wealthy. Because even though it's kind of semi-arid, especially in the interior, on the coast, it's actually a bit wetter, and there are more rivers there. So that allowed irrigation. And what they did is they used the available water supply in conjunction with the climate to grow a whole bunch of sugar. And sugar was wildly valuable back in the 1600s and the 1700s, for that matter. You could make a whole shit ton of money with that. And in turn, you could make a whole shit ton of tax revenue, taxing that income. So sugar plantations got to be really popular for that reason in northeastern Brazil. And they ended up powering the early colonial Brazilian economy. In fact, they did so well that during the 30 Years' War, which I remind you was a period in which Portugal was technically a part of Spain, there was a marriage alliance between the royal families of Spain and Portugal in the, I want to say, mid-late 1500s. And so there was a kind of union of the kingdoms. They were never formally merged together. They were still technically separate kingdoms. But because they had the same royal family leading both, they were effectively the same country. That's kind of how they did things back then. So the result is that the Portuguese Empire, which encompassed Brazil at the time, continued to exist as a distinct polity, separate from that of the Spanish Empire. But in practice, it was all one continuous thing. So there wasn't any competition between them, like there had been before the marriage alliance. Trying to remember where I was going with that.
How
Too
come
many
sugar is not
tangents.
as viable or profitable anymore? Because I heard when I went to Hawaii and we got the tour of their like former sugar plantations, it was that if you have to pay the workers more than like slave wages, it's really hard to make the sugar crop profitable. But that might be because the demand went down or something. Like I don't know if we make more artificial sugar now.
Prices collapsed in the early 1800s. That was the bigger problem. Prices had been very high because demand was immense, and there was a limit to how much could be supplied. But over the course of a couple hundred years, given how prices were, there were more and more sugar plantations that were set up, and eventually supply finally caught up to demand, and prices cratered. And that pushed a lot of them out of business because they couldn't compete. And even after that, prices never really went back to the high profit margin days. Profit margins are much narrower now. So sugar plantations went from major economic drivers that were a significant source of tax revenue for different kingdoms to being just marginal economic activity. In fact, if anything, it's harmful because plantation political economies are always garbage. Rare is the territory that had a plantation political economy that later on evolved into like a modern developed economy. It just doesn't really happen. The politics of having all economic and political power in the hands of a single or in a handful of families that own the plantations, that's not good for equality. That's not, there's no incentive to like invest in education or building human capital with that. The plantation owners have what they need, which is the revenue from their plantation. And because they have the political power, they can keep all of the revenue from that to themselves and not share it with the plantation workers, which has the added benefit of keeping the plantation workers on the plantation. They don't want them to leave. Nobody really wants to work on a plantation. And the people who do generally do it just because there's no alternative. So if you're running a plantation, it actually benefits you to limit the options of people in your community so that they don't run off and do something crazy like build a better life for themselves outside of a shit plantation with a low quality of life. Oh, that's what I was getting at. So there was a period when Portugal and Spain were effectively one country. And so during the 30 Years' War, one of the ongoing conflicts that kind of overlapped with the 30 Years' War, but was also part of it, was the Dutch Revolution. I think it was the Dutch War of Independence. I forget the technical name. They had been part of the Spanish Empire. But in the late 1500s, they revolted and successfully ejected Spanish troops from their territory. And what followed was an 80-year period of intermittent conflicts between the Dutch and the Spanish, where the Spanish were trying to reconquer the Low Country, reconquer the Netherlands. And so, as a result, both before and during the 30 Years' War, the Spanish were at war with the Dutch. And in this period, because the Portuguese were part of the Spanish, were effectively a part of Spain, the Portuguese Empire, by extension, was also at war with the Dutch. And this is important and relevant to what we're talking about here, because during this period, during the 30 Years' War, the Dutch Navy was able to successfully capture a Spanish galleon that was loaded with gold from the Americas. And that was a huge deal because the galleons carried like massive amounts of gold, and gold was very valuable at the time, much more so than now, just in terms of like what you could purchase with it. So a galleon full of Spanish gold was enough to fund the Dutch war effort for like 10 years. It was a crazy amount of money, and it was able to really help them out in the war effort, obviously. One of the things they used the money for was to invade northeastern Brazil. This would have been like roughly early mid 1600s. They actually launched an expedition into, I think it was Recife, a specific territory in northeastern Brazil, and successfully seized it. And they actually held on to it for a long time, like 10, 15 years, something like that. And there was some question about whether or not it might just end up getting ceded to the Dutch as part of an eventual peace settlement. So we almost had Dutch Brazil. We came very close. It would have been very cool if we had. what it wasn't to be. And the reason they did not end up with it is not because the Spanish or Portuguese empires successfully ejected them. They didn't send armies in and push them out. At least that wasn't the main factor. The main factor is that the Dutch managed to aggravate the plantation owners in northeastern Brazil to the point where they actually got together and formed their own revolutionary army. And that combined with conventional armies, I think Portuguese conventional armies, were together able to eject the Dutch. So if not for local help, if the locals hadn't just gotten sick and tired of Dutch bullshit, it's entirely possible the Portuguese would not have been able to recover or receive. And that it would have then gone on to become a Dutch holding. What could have been Neuro?
Interesting. The Dutch.
They still had Suriname, so not a total loss for them. I think they held on to Suriname until, what was it, 1975? Something like that. And even now, they still have the Dutch Antilles. Have you ever heard of those?
Where is that again? Sounds familiar.
That's a string of islands just north of Venezuela. They're right there next to the coast. I think there's 3 of them, and all of them are still part of the Netherlands. They're Dutch territory. I don't think they're even really I don't think they even have autonomy. Like, they are just provinces of the Netherlands, as I understand it. Yeah, it's Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire, I think, are the names of the islands. And they've kind of become popular tourist hotspots. And I think for a while they actually had a lot of oil refining capacity there. Venezuela obviously is a big oil exporter, and so it's got to go somewhere. The Venezuelans I don't think Venezuela ever fully developed the ability to refine oil, so the pattern is that Venezuela would export the oil and then it would get refined in the United States, and then the product would be exported on elsewhere. But the Dutch got in on that, and they actually got into the business of refining some of Venezuela's oil. So for a while, that was actually a major economic activity on the islands. To the point that during World War II, one of the things the Germans did is they actually had a couple U-boats go out to the Dutch Antilles and actually shell the refineries.
Damn.
This is back in a day when submarines had guns. Yeah, U-boats were gangster like that.
I see.
Well, let's see. What is your opinion with Mexico's current administration, left-leaning, supporting Cuba, etc., and their narco strategy in union with the U.S., considering Trump's war on cartel policies? Seems like the partnership is a needed paradox. Mexico's government has a lot in common with the Trump administration in that they are both very, very populist. Like, it is left-leaning, and for sure Trump is not left-leaning. But they're both united in that they are both fundamentally populist in orientation. And that actually means they have more in common than different, even with the difference in nominal partisan alignment. Populists are always about just doing what's popular to get what they want, which is generally pretty self-serving and corrupt. So Trump does that. Obviously, there's just so many scandals, so much bullshit, you can't even list them all. But the Sheinbaum administration and the broader, I always forget the name of her party. It's been in power for like 10 years, and it just doesn't stick in my head. That party has been in power for a while now, and it basically runs the same way. It's about power, and it's about siphoning resources to the leaders of the party. That's not to say they haven't done some useful stuff. You know, they have done things that are genuinely popular and that probably needed to be done anyway. But you could say that about the Trump administration, right? They've done some useful things, but they haven't done it out of a genuine interest in good governance or the national interest. They do it because they want to use it as an excuse to do other things. So Scheinbaum's administration and the previous Obrador administration before them, they're the same. It's the same shit, just with different labels. Let's see. That's basically the gist of it. I could kind of go into a little more detail, but that's basically it. That's my perspective on them. I haven't seen anything to really change my opinion on them in the time they've been in power. So until something happens that does, my reading is that it's just a basic bitch populist government of the kind that we can see in any number of governments around the world right now.
It's interesting thinking about the different ists that you can have to describe a government and its people, like populist, nationalist, isolationist, expansionist. You've got the different sliders there. Globalist, another one.
Globo homo. There's so many bullshit names. It's endless. Some are more legitimate than others, but yeah, the internet delights in creating new names for new movements, ideologies, etc. It's a real bottomless well. Yeah. Yeah, once you start breaking them down into like subcategories and subcategories of subcategories, the tautologies that result are wild. Well, not ontologies, I should say.
Today I learned about the radical conservative feminists. I didn't know that was a thing.
That still blows my mind.
Yeah. Sounds contradictory, but I guess it isn't technically.
Yeah, they're what's called identitarians. So in Europe, the identitarians are people who believe in a common European identity and culture and want to protect that against a rising tide of foreign immigrants who are undermining and ultimately going to destroy that European identity and culture.
I see.
Yeah, so that actually kind of confounds traditional left-right divide, because it's possible to believe in a lot of left-wing stuff, like, socialist public policy or other such things, and still believe that. Like, there are left-wing people that do not like immigration into Europe, especially from the Muslim world, and have campaigned against it because they see it as a threat against the left-wing achievements that have been made in those countries, as far as things like having a secular culture, having secular politics, etc. So that's kind of a different motivation than, say, the right wing, which, as you can guess, has very different motives for why they don't want foreigners in Europe. But yeah, there is kind of a left wing to that movement, which overlaps with the traditional establishment left wing. So that's how you end up with weird groups like this that are kind of left wing coded. Like, Feminist Collective is super left wing coded. There's not a lot of things that would be more so. But they still identify with the identitarians because of the perceived threat from people they see as being much, much more culturally, for being culturally foreign and socially conservative, which they see as antithetical to the secular left-wing values that are more centered and dominant in Europe than, say, in the United States. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because here in the United States, we also have a lot of immigration, but it's not nearly as threatening to, say, the political left and some of the political left culture and policies that have taken root in the United States over the past half century. So you really don't see this nearly as much here in the US. There's no there's no hard right feminist collectives in the United States. It's kind of a contradiction. But Islamic, it's not even really, it's more Arab. That's like, realistically speaking, it's mostly about Arabs. Arab migration into Europe has been much more contentious and has united much more strange bedfellows and alliances than their equivalents in the United States, just because the disparity in culture between the Arab world and Europe is much starker than the differences between, say, Protestant American culture and Catholic Latin American culture. I actually saw a somewhat humorous YouTube video from some right-wing guy in Europe who was making fun of right-wing people in the United States for complaining about the massive influx of European-descended Christian peoples into the United States, which he thought was pretty fucking rich. So yeah, it's a weird situation we're in. Strange times, as they say. Let's see. Okay, the last question we had here. What is the purpose of the US, China, others developing research centers in Antarctica? See, I don't follow Antarctic research news, so I'm not super up on new research centers in in Antarctica. Um, if I had to guess, I would say partly just spirit of international cooperation, maybe a signal that the respective governments are willing to cooperate in order to try to inculcate a more positive relationship ahead of negotiations. Keep in mind, Trump is actually going to go to Beijing and talk with Xi Jinping within the next couple weeks, next month or two, something like that. So it could be a signal to the Chinese that the United States is receptive to cooperation and negotiations. It could just be a way of maintaining the norm that Antarctica doesn't belong to anybody. So, in so much as there is research that people want done down there, the governments involved may think it better to do it in unison rather than separately, in order to avoid the temptation of undermining that norm by making implicit claims. And it could also just be for fun. Fuck it. Like, sometimes if somebody has a good research idea and other countries want to participate, they can just negotiate that. It kind of depends on the nature of the research centers. I don't know. Maybe they found an ancient temple there. Who's to say? Maybe there are aliens in the temple. And maybe predators want to kill them. It's worth studying if that's the case. I would certainly be very interested in some footage of that.
It is also so ridiculously extremely hostile of an environment that building anything there like really, really sucks. So it's not a very contested location.
Yeah, there are resources under the ground, but you're right. Extracting them is an absolute bitch. So,
well, that was the point that you made about Greenland. It's like, yes, Greenland does have some minerals, but accessing them is super hard. And very impractical, and it would almost cost more to go and get the resources than to just not have that operation.
Yeah, we're going to need a lot more global warming before that really becomes economically feasible. Maybe the same could be said of Antarctica, but for now at least it's doing fine. So yeah, those are all my best guesses as to why there would be research centers in Antarctica. I guess I'm implicitly assuming these are joint operations. I guess reading the question again, that's not necessarily the case. Why would multiple countries want to? It's the same answer, basically. Maybe they just want to research it. I don't know what they're researching in Antarctica. Maybe some. I know they take ice cores to do global warming related research. It's not called global warming anymore, is it?
Climate research?
I think it's like, it was global warming, and then it was climate change, and I think now it's climate emergency. I think it's gone through a couple iterations now, and I think I've kind of lost track of where they're at the moment. I think honestly, a lot of people just stopped paying attention. It was big. It was a big deal in like the 2010s, and then Trump was elected, and everybody was like, "Oh fuck! All right, well, whatever." It's not happening now. If it was ever going to happen, it's definitely not happening now. Yeah, so we'll see if we all bake to death in the coming decades. That seems to be in the cards now. Pretty clear we're not going to be stopping it in time regardless. So we're going to put some of those apocalyptic theories and hypotheses to the test. Let's see if we all die.
Let them cook. You can do a lot of space research, like stuff that would apply to different planets in Antarctica because it's so cold and inhospitable. that you can like test stuff of, okay, in this super cold, windy, nasty environment, would we be able to do X, Y, or Z? Antarctica is a place where you can test that because it is similarly shitty.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess I can see that. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody doing that, but that, again, I don't follow it, so I probably just missed it. Yeah, I can see it. Well, that's about all the questions we had, and I don't really have any more big item. How are we doing on time?
I'm going for 2 hours and 30.
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. Well, was there anything you wanted to kind of get to? Well, you know what? Let me do a quick correction. Because while we were talking about Brazil, I remembered this. I had said I was trying to remember last time how people in Brazil self-identify. And what I said is that they don't self-identify as Latinos because that's seen as a Spanish Latin America thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's wrong. I think I misremembered that. I think what I was trying to remember is they don't consider themselves part of Latin America. Because Latin America to them refers to the Spanish-speaking parts of the Americas. So I wanted to throw that correction out there.
Let's see. We were listening to some African music earlier today. I think Nigerian.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
What ethnic group?
I don't know. Are there multiple in Nigeria? Well, I guess there are some.
There's a whole fuck ton in, there's a whole fuck ton in Nigeria. There's 3 big ones, and those are the ones that I remember, the 3 dominant ethnic groups. One of them is Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. There are many more, but the others tend to be very, very small. Yeah, the Igbo are the southern people, I think more southeastern people of Nigeria, whom are predominantly Christian. And they're actually the ones that tried to break away from Nigeria not long after the country became independent. And that resulted in the so-called Biafra War. Biafra was the nation the Igbo tried to form. Yeah, the resulting conflict was extremely violent and killed a whole shit ton of Igbo in Nigeria. So while the Nigerian government was successful in defeating the separatist movement, there have been a few Igbo holdouts since then. It's actually illegal to talk about it in Nigeria, as I recall. Not about the war per se, but just like separatism. You're not supposed to talk about like separating chunks of territory, and especially not Biafra. That's kind of out of bounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Yoruba are more coastal and southwestern, I want to say. And they are also Christians, as I recall. I don't know as much about them, though, like as far as their reputation and customs. The Hausa are the easiest to remember because they control a huge stretch of territory in the north, and they are predominantly Muslim. And they're the ones that have actually been running Nigeria pretty much since independence. The Nigerian political elite is disproportionately Hausa in ethnicity. They're kind of the cowboys of Nigeria. You know, the northern part of Nigeria is part of the Sahel, and it's kind of semi-arid, scrubland, you know, difficult terrain. There are farmers there, but a disproportionate chunk of the population historically have been nomads. They kind of move from place to place on horseback. So the traditional culture kind of has a lot of similarities with like American cowboy culture, kind of out on the frontier, moving around, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of in-country migration from the coast because the capital of Nigeria is in sort of the middle of the country, which is more Hausa territory. It attracts a lot of people looking for opportunities. And so that's drawn in a lot of poor people in the Igbo and Yoruba communities in the south of Nigeria. And the result has been some demographic change in the center of the country correspondingly. It's much less Hausa and Muslim now than it used to be. Now it's much more Christian and either Igbo or Yoruba. And that's resulted in some ethnic tension. You know, they're all kind of crammed together inside, I think it's called Abuja, the capital. And yeah, every so often there's some communal clashes that result. Did I ever tell you about the gangs in Nigeria?
I don't know.
So some of the most prominent gangs in Nigeria are actually, what's the word? Fraternities, like college fraternities. Yeah, like after independence, I don't remember the exact history of it. It's been too long since I read about it. But a bunch of these college fraternities started getting involved in crime to make money. And eventually a lot of them evolved into just full-on organized crime groups.
Damn.
But they never actually like fully disentangled themselves from the fraternities. And so a lot of the college groups like that, you know, Greek life, I think is what they call it in the United States. A lot of that kind of culture and those institutions in Nigeria have strong links to organized crime.
Yeah, you
So
know,
when you're
play some
getting
beer pong, do some heists.
do some murder,
Normal
they're known
frat
to be
stuff.
quite violent.
Damn.
Yeah. So when you're getting scammed by a Nigerian prince, there's a better than decent chance it's actually a frat boy.
Today I learned. It was interesting seeing in that South Africa mini documentary thing you showed me that they were really upset at foreigners of basically any kind. And one of the examples was just a Nigerian shopkeeper person who was getting harassed. He's like, I'm here legally, I'm just Nigerian. But they firmly believe that all the foreigners are selling drugs to the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, regrettably common all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
That is the politics, not the selling, not the immigrants selling drugs to kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, just lots of xenophobia everywhere. It seems to be a very human reaction to change.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of ingrained behavior. Well, we kind of blew through today. It was kind of a very breezy conversational segment.
Yeah. Good work. The US and Canada apparently are still friends even after fighting each other in hockey.
Yeah, that's...
I asked my dad if there was any fighting in Olympic hockey, and he was saying that in international regulations, you get disqualified from the match if you take gloves off and start punching someone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's more of a North American thing.
Yeah.
Did you notice how much bigger the rinks are in the Olympics?
I did not.
Yeah, international competition for hockey has slightly different rules than hockey in North America. And one of them is that the standard rink is much bigger. So you have a lot more space to operate in when you're playing hockey on an international rink.
Does that favor goalies or shooters?
I don't know that it favors either so much as it favors a style of play. It favors a much more fluid, less physical style. Because with the North American rinks, like everybody's kind of crammed together, and it makes it much easier to be physical. To check people, to just the physicality of the North American game is known to be much higher than in international hockey. So in turn, international hockey tends to be much more skill-based.
Chat's
saying that I'm wrong.
Yeah, they're saying that historically you're right, but for the Milan one specifically, it was smaller.
Really?
Because it was shorter in length but the same width.
When did they make that change?
I think just for this Olympics.
How bizarre.
I don't know why.
I'll have to look that up. I was not aware.
Well, you do say you're not an expert in everything, and you have more of a background in economics than hockey.
Oh, shit.
You do
that's right. I didn't do the usual disclaimer today, did I? Yeah, well, I am, in fact, as Neuro says, not an expert in everything I talk about. More painfully obvious at sometimes than others, this being one of them. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased, please let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged. I don't read chat while we do this, but I will read it later. Oof, almost missed it.
No, he still got it. As long as it's in the episode, it counts. Doesn't need to be at a certain time. If I was fussy about that, I would let you know. I'd be like, man, you got to get this in early because people are getting very upset at your hockey facts. They're wrong. I thought he was an expert. No, he's not a hockey expert, but he casually follows some hockey stuff.
Oh, yeah, I used to follow it a lot more back when I was younger, but then, man, grad school hit. Grad school will fuck up your hobbies, guys. Be mindful. It's worth it. Grad school is great. I learned a lot. Even though I just failed miserably, like I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a great experience. But yeah, there's definitely going to be some hobbies that fall by the wayside. I just didn't have the time to follow the stars nearly as much as I had when I was younger. So yeah, like even a lot of the names of the players in the Olympics, like playing for the Canadian and American teams, like I do not know these people. Like, who the fuck are they? There was one image, there was one picture of a guy named Hughes that got to be pretty popular. It was making the rounds online, and like I had never heard of him before. I had no idea who he was. I had to look him up. I think I've said this before, but a lot of the names in the NHL now, and I guess at the Olympics as well, kind of remind me of the fake names that my NHL games back in the day on PlayStation used to generate when I was playing Dynasty mode. You play Dynasty mode and you manage a team over time, but eventually players retire and you have to draft new ones. And so the game actually automatically generates new players for you with randomized names. And the further you go into Dynasty mode, the larger the proportion of the players in the league are comprised of just these artificially generated fake players. And they always had like weird names that just felt very strange. And because I've just been away from hockey so long, like all of the names feel like that to me now. Just who the fuck is that? Who the fuck is this? Like, what is happening? I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, our boys Brett Hull and Mike Minato are pretty old now, so.
They are. They're up there. They're looking at these days too. It's kind of weird to see. So it goes.
Yep. It was interesting. This is kind of random metal news. There's a band from Sweden called Arch Enemy who plays melodic death metal, and they were famous for having a female vocalist. I think they got started late 90s, early aughts, something like that. And their vocalist was Angela Gassau, really haughty blonde lady who's very powerful and has great stage presence and voice and so on. But she's the vocalist for the band for like 10 or 15 years, something like that. And it's just really taxing doing that. And apparently the band parties pretty hard. And she ended up having to be the adult for the group and not drink and manage everything, making sure everything was good as the sober one. So after she retired from the band, she became the band manager, and they got a different vocalist, Alyssa White Glows. And she's really cool. Not really as much my style as the previous vocalist, but she still did the job well. And she was the vocalist for Arch Enemy for, I think, 13 years, and then went on to do a solo project. And now there's another vocalist. They were talking about bringing back the first vocalist, and she said she might show up for some shows, but it's better to go to a vocalist who's fresh and wants to be in the band longer term, and that she's going to stay the manager. But that's kind of cool to see a band's legacy go for a while and have some people stay, some people go, some people change to more of a backline position for the band.
Oh yeah, evolution. Yeah, normally they just kind of flame out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most bands don't last, and being a vocalist is pretty hard too, especially with the screaming sort of bands. There are techniques to do it where it's supposed to not hurt your vocal cords, but I think it is still more of a strain than playing a guitar would be, or playing drums. So a lot of those vocalists have a limited lifespan.
Gotcha. Well, good on her for adapting.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do. I'm not very good at adapting. I'm very much an anti-change personality, unfortunately. So I respect the people that can make it happen.
Yeah, well, the status quo gives us the comfort of the consistency.
It does. It does. Routine will ruin you, but it's a very comfortable ruination.
Mm-hmm. Better than volatility. Yeah, I guess my big analysis quip for the day was that what was it related to shit, I lost it. Oh yeah, lawful evil. Certain populist governments would prefer lawful evil to chaotic good because lawful evil follows rules and has structure.
Investors.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that is entirely true. That is an accurate read on international investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to, as much as we would like the world to be a better place and a more loving place and a peaceful place, one that prioritizes science and technology and medicine and all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff, the people in power want more power and more money. And sometimes they end up giving some concessions of like, okay, sure, we'll give you this new bill or this new protection because you protested hard enough and you made a clear demand. But a government is not going to do that unless it is pressured to do so. It wants to, like you mentioned with status quo, it wants to do what it's been doing and give itself more power. It's often self-interested. So I guess the reason that populists have been successful recently is because they at least pander to the interests of the regular person. They don't necessarily deliver what you want in the way that you actually want it, but they will tell you that they will, and they'll get you fired up. And I think the emotion is a big part of populism, like really engaging with people's issues that they yell about rather than ones that are necessarily the most productive to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, the emotive nature of populist politics has been much commented on for thousands of years. You can go all the way back to ancient Greece, and some of the writings that have survived since then actually talk about that, the demagoguery of the era, and how they relied on emotional manipulation to get public support. Mm-hmm. It's a recurring phenomena across history. Mm-hmm. This is just the latest iteration.
Yep. We'll see how it swings.
We will at that. And whether or not we survive.
Yep.
It's going to be quite the ride.
I think some people will survive. I think with the if there is like climate decline to the point that certain places become unlivable, that would probably mean that not everyone can afford to relocate. Like it'll displace people from areas that become too hot or there's not enough water. I think those would be some of the main reasons that you would move away from an area, or your lake dries up, stuff like that. There are already lots of examples of that. But people overall are very resilient. There are tons of us right now. We're overpopulated. So I don't know if it's just going to be the Zuckerbergs who live in the bunkers, but we'll see. I like to be optimistic. I think when the pressure gets high enough, humans tend to respond with enough to survive. Like we've at least been able to demonstrate that over the course of our long and storied history and prehistory. We've been able to make fire. We've been able to go to the different continents. We've been able to go to the moon. We've been able to go through the world wars, chemical weapons at each other, nukes at each other a little bit. We'll see if we can keep it in our pants with that. But yeah, the quality of life goes up in a lot of places, which we've seen is a demotivator for violence. If my life is better, I don't want to risk my life to stab you. I need to be in a pretty desperate situation to want to hurt somebody, because that puts myself at risk. I would rather sometimes tolerate a kind of bad status quo, which is, I think, an example of a lot of the governments in the world right now, like the dictatorships and so on, is people are living in an evil society, but it has structure and they can have a place in it where they can be productive in some capacities, so they tolerate it. They don't like just go into the protests in the street and upheaval, even if we as outsiders might think, hey, you should have a revolution and get a new government. It's like, it's easy for us to say from the outside, but if they have to risk their life and their families' lives, suddenly that becomes a lot more dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, there was one little, it's more like gossipy thing that it probably doesn't have political sway because it's the British royal family. But apparently Prince Andrew is in deep shit from Epstein stuff. And his brother, Prince William, in a way did a really polite fuck you, let the justice system take care of you kind of message. Nothing he said was like actually bashing, but it was like in the very cold and dismissive way of hoping that the correct justice is pursued toward his brother. But I guess they didn't get along historically. So for his brother to get some just desserts, I would say is probably a good thing. But he sounded like an example of one of the people who's spoiled by power and kind of loses the charm and the relatability of understanding that you're a person too, and the people who work under you as a royal are the same species. You're not special as a royal. You're not a superhero. You're just someone who got lucky in the lineage that you were dealt. But he was apparently pretty mean, and now he's in big trouble. So there's some English drama.
Yeah, Prince Andrew has been like of the people that have been implicated in the Epstein drama, he's probably the one that has been the most implicated. Like he seems like he's kind of gotten a disproportionate share of the fallout there. And I don't know why that is exactly. Maybe there's just more evidence of his involvement, but yeah, he's definitely had that. He's definitely had the hammer dropped on him more so than pretty much anybody else I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the most recent scalp was Mandelson. He's a British guy who had been British ambassador to the United States at one point. And apparently, his role in British politics went much deeper than that. Apparently, he's had been for decades something of a fixer within British politics, which I was not aware of. And yeah, he was implicated with the most recent big release of Epstein-related files and documents and whatnot. And so the British government has been kind of distancing itself from him recently on account of that.
Yep.
I thought it was interesting too that Prince Andrew the charges that were brought against him don't actually have to do with basically the sexual crimes that he's alleged to have been involved in. It has more to do with documents being transferred. Yeah, apparently he was sending some documents to Epstein, and they were like classified, or he was not supposed to share them anyway. And so apparently the most recent, wow, the most recent release of files suggests that he did send some, and that's the grounds for the investigation.
Interesting. So not only an evil man, but a disloyal one too.
Yeah, Epstein was a money guy, and he seems to have been pretty interested in trying to extract information that he could use in some of his operations. So some of the files have him asking for information and documents from people who have privileged access, and those people seem to have been interested in sharing in exchange for some kind of quid pro quo, presumably involving money. Yeah, for all of the talk about Epstein and his shenanigans with like underage girls, it seems his big thing was the money. He was a money guy. He was a fixer. He was an investor. He was the guy that you went to if you wanted advice on where to put your money, or if you wanted somebody to invest your money for you. That's my impression thus far, anyway. I always pegged him for a money guy, but the more documents come out, the more that seems like an accurate characterization.
Your one-stop shop for shady, evil shit for the rich and powerful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those guys are always around, but because they can't really operate openly, their business model is heavily dependent on networking, right? You have to socialize. Got to get out there and meet people, get them to trust you, get them to give you referrals. That's how you build that kind of sort of shady gray market financial business. That I expect is principally what the girls were for. That was not so much like the main thing he was doing. I suspect that was more about building trust with possible clients and contacts. That's actually not unusual in China. That's not so much like the pedo stuff, in so much as that was a thing. But if you're trying to do business with somebody, or you're negotiating with somebody in either business or government, it's not necessarily unheard of for them to kind of build trust by engaging in some kind of shady activity, which can include prostitution. So, if you're building trust with a guy, you may end up, paying for his prostitute or having sex in the same room, something weird like that. Sex, drugs, and alcohol are frequently things used in the business world in different countries around the world to kind of solidify a deal in a business relationship. So that's not as common in the United States in the modern era, but it does still happen, and Epstein seems like the avatar of that. And I think it's much more common with people who are basically operating in the black market. They tend to have a more traditional view of business operations. And trust obviously is very important when you're operating in either the black or gray market. So maybe it's not that surprising that he has these sorts of trust building leisure activities up to and including prostitution. That seems like a more accurate read than just he's the head of a master pedophile trafficking ring. Like, I still don't really buy that. There's more evidence coming out, and people are still filtering through all of it, so we'll see. I could easily be wrong. But just based off of what I've read thus far, a lot of the public's reactions, especially the more dramatic ones, don't seem entirely founded.
Yeah, well, anyone who is excited by conspiracies is going to be really excited by this, because it's a lot of information that was hidden that is now somewhat visible, which almost makes it even more of a annoyance and not really knowing the depth of the operation. But it's definitely a bad thing that happened, and having famous people who are on a first name or household name basis with Americans and Europeans is interesting, because whether someone gets like actual justice meted out at them or just social consequences of getting canceled or something like that, there is still a decent bit at stake for some people in some ways. We don't know what the ultimate outcome of all of that is going to be. We just know that it was a bad thing going on, that information is now coming out about it, and certain people's careers are going to be mixed up. But a lot of people have grand designs or wishes of maybe the person who I hate will be in trouble from this.
Yeah. I suspect that's the real motivator here for a lot of people online. They're going to be disappointed, most likely. That's my expectation.
Yep, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Developing story.
Appreciate you going through stuff with us this week, and go USA with the hockey. That was pretty hype.
Yeah, always fun.
Yep. Dad said it was a good game. I didn't watch the whole thing. I don't think I was awake yet, but I saw the highlights when I woke up. Well, cool. Well, thank you, chat, for your contributions. Thank you, Fuzzy Code for handling questions, and Agent Smith for your time. We will see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yeah, thanks again. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG. Very nice.